She was supposed to be a bride. Instead, she became a ghost, left to freeze on an empty platform while the man who promised her everything married someone else. The blizzard was closing in, her fingers turning blue, death circling like a hungry wolf. Then, through the white fury, a stranger emerged. He wrapped her in his coat, pulled her against his chest, and whispered words that would change everything. "I've got you now." But could a cowboy's warmth melt a heart frozen by betrayal? Stay with me until the end of this story, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The train's whistle cut through the Montana twilight like a knife through silk, sharp, final, and utterly indifferent to the chaos it left behind. Isabel Turner stood on the wooden platform of Wolf Creek Station, watching the locomotive disappear into the gathering dusk, its red taillight winking out like a dying star. The sound of its departure echoed across the frozen plains, and then there was nothing but silence. The kind of silence that pressed against eardrums and made a person aware of just how alone they truly were. She was 23 years old, educated, well-mannered, and according to her mother's frequent laments, hopelessly unmarriageable. Too opinionated, they said, too prone to reading books that filled her head with notions, too unwilling to accept that a woman's place was to nod, smile, and never, ever question. So when the matrimonial advertisement appeared in the Boston Herald, prosperous Montana rancher seeks educated woman of good character for marriage, must be willing to embrace frontier life. Correspondents welcomed. Isabel had answered it with a desperation she'd never admitted aloud. Edward Langford's letters had been adequate. Not romantic, but practical. He wrote of his land, his prospects, his need for a partner who could manage a household and perhaps teach the children he hoped to have. He'd sent a photograph, a stern-faced man with a neat mustache and eyes that revealed nothing. Isabel hadn't loved him, but she'd convinced herself that love could grow from respect and partnership. Her mother had called her foolish. Her sister had cried. Her father had simply handed her the money for the train ticket and said, "If this is what you need, go find it." The journey west had taken 8 days. 8 days of rattling rails and strange faces, of crossing from the civilized East into territories where the land stretched endlessly in every direction, where the sky was so vast it seemed to swallow the earth whole. Isabel had watched America transform outside her window, from neat farms to rolling prairies to the savage, beautiful wilderness of Montana Territory. With each mile, she'd felt both terror and exhilaration. She was leaving everything familiar behind. She was becoming someone new. But now, standing on this platform with the cold seeping through her wool traveling dress and thin shawl, Isabel understood the difference between bravery and foolishness. And she'd been a fool. The station master, a wizened man with tobacco-stained whiskers and eyes that had seen too much of human cruelty, had delivered the news with the emotional investment of someone reporting the weather. Edward Langford? Oh, he married Susanna Pritchard 3 weeks ago. Didn't nobody tell you? Isabel's carefully packed trunk sat beside her, mocking her with its weight. Inside were the things she'd brought to build a new life. Books, her mother's silver hairbrush, the green silk dress she'd saved for her wedding day, letters tied with ribbon. All of it suddenly felt like the belongings of a stranger, a naive girl who'd believed that answering an advertisement could somehow transform loneliness into belonging. "Is there a hotel?" she'd asked, proud that her voice didn't shake. The station master had laughed, a sound like gravel scraping against wood. "Hotel? Miss, this is Wolf Creek, not Denver. We got Murphy's boarding house, but it's full up with railroad surveyors. Won't have a room for at least 2 weeks. A restaurant, somewhere I could wait? Nothing open past 6, and it's half past that now." He'd squinted at the darkening sky, where clouds the color of old bruises were rolling in from the north. "Storm's coming too. Bad one, by the look of it. You got people to meet you?" That was when the full weight of her situation had crashed down on her shoulders. No people, no room, no plan, and a blizzard coming. I'll figure something out," she'd said, lifting her chin in a way her mother had always called prideful. "Thank you for your help." The station master had shrugged and retreated into his office, shutting the door against the wind. Through the frosted window, Isabel could see him settling into his chair, pulling out a pipe. She might as well have been invisible. And now here she was, as the temperature dropped and the first snowflakes began to fall. They came softly at first, delicate, almost pretty, but Isabel had read enough about the frontier to know that Montana winters didn't play games. What started as beauty could become death in a matter of hours. She pulled her shawl tighter, but it was like trying to hold back the ocean with her hands. The wind cut through the fabric, through her dress, through her skin. Her fingers were already aching with cold, and she'd lost feeling in her toes 5 minutes ago. Around her, Wolf Creek was shutting down for the night. Lights winked out in windows. The blacksmith's forge went dark. Even the saloon, which she could hear rowdy with voices, seemed distant and unreachable. A woman alone couldn't walk into such a place, not without inviting trouble worse than freezing. Isabel did some quick mathematics in her head. She had $4.37. The return train wouldn't come through for 3 days. Even if she could afford a ticket back east, which she couldn't, she'd be dead long before then. The snow was falling faster now, thick flakes that clung to her eyelashes and melted against her cheeks. Or maybe those were tears. She couldn't tell anymore. "Think, Isabel," she whispered to herself, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "You read all those books. You've got an education. Use your mind." But her mind was growing sluggish, thoughts moving like molasses. That scared her more than anything. She'd read about hypothermia, about how the body shut down to preserve its core, about how people got confused, made bad decisions, wandered off into the snow and simply lay down to sleep. It seemed almost peaceful in the descriptions. The reality felt like being erased piece by piece. She could try to walk into town, find a church perhaps. Surely a church would offer sanctuary. But Wolf Creek's main street was already disappearing behind the curtain of snow, and she couldn't remember seeing a church spire when the train had pulled in. If she got lost, stumbled off the road in the white darkness, no. Better to stay here, near the station. At least here there was some shelter from the wind beneath the platform's overhang. Isabel dragged her trunk against the wall and sat down on it, pulling her knees to her chest, trying to make herself as small as possible to conserve warmth. Her teeth chattered so violently she bit her tongue, tasting blood. This was how she was going to die. Not from some grand tragedy, but from simple, stupid miscalculation, from believing that a man's letter constituted a promise, from thinking that courage was enough. She thought about her mother, who would receive the telegram in a week or two. "Regret to inform you, daughter, found frozen. Our condolences." Her mother would cry, but there would be an edge of "I told you so" in her grief. Her sister would marry her accountant and live a safe, predictable life in a brownstone on Commonwealth Avenue. Her father would smoke his pipe and stare out at the Boston harbor and wonder where he'd failed. "I'm sorry, Papa," Isabel whispered. "I wanted to be brave. I wanted to matter." The snow swirled around her in eddies and currents, the wind howling like something alive and hungry. Her hands were white now, waxy looking. She couldn't feel them at all. The cold had moved past pain into something almost like warmth, which she knew was a lie her body told as it prepared to surrender. She let her eyes close just for a moment, just to rest. The sound of hoofbeats shouldn't have penetrated her awareness. She was too far gone for that. But something primal in her brain, some ancient survival instinct, forced her eyes open. Through the snow, a shape was materializing. At first, Isabel thought she was hallucinating. The figure was too large, too solid against the whiteout. A horse, massive and dark, with a rider hunched against the storm. For one confused moment, she thought death had come for her, and death rode a black horse through blizzards. The rider pulled up short when he saw her, the horse's breath steaming in the frigid air. From her position on the trunk, Isabel had to tilt her head back to see his face, which was mostly hidden by a wide-brimmed hat and a bandana pulled up against the cold. But his eyes, she could see his eyes. They were gray, like storm clouds, like the Montana sky before a tempest. "Jesus Christ," the man said, and his voice was rough with shock and something that might have been anger. "What the hell are you doing out here?" Isabel tried to answer, but her jaw was locked with cold. All that came out was a pathetic stammering sound. The man swung down from his horse in one fluid motion, landing in the snow beside the platform. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that seemed to fill her entire field of vision. "Can you stand?" he demanded, And when she didn't respond, he cursed again, a creative string of profanity that would have shocked her in any other circumstance, and simply bent down and scooped her up. "No," Isabel managed, though whether she was protesting being lifted or protesting dying, she wasn't entirely sure. "Please." "Hush now," the man said, and his voice gentled slightly. "I've got you." He settled her in front of him on the horse, then shrugged out of his heavy sheepskin coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. The warmth was immediate and overwhelming. The coat still held his body heat, and it felt like being submerged in hot water. Isabel gasped, and suddenly her body remembered how to shiver. Violent tremors racked her frame. "That's good," the man said, pulling her back against his chest and wrapping one arm around her waist to hold her steady. "Shivering means you're not too far gone. What's your name?" Isabel," she managed through chattering teeth. "Isabel Turner." "Well, Miss Turner, I'm Gideon Walsh, and you picked a hell of a night to freeze to death on my town's platform." He reached past her to gather the reins. "Your trunk coming with us? Or can it wait till morning?" I don't... We'll get it tomorrow," he decided. "Right now I need to get you somewhere warm before you lose any fingers. You feel your feet?" No." Another curse. Another frostbite, maybe. We'll see. He clicked his tongue, and the horse started moving, breaking into a careful trot through the deepening snow. "You got family here? Someone I need to notify?" "No," Isabel whispered. "No one." She felt him tense behind her. "You came all the way out here alone? To Wolf Creek?" "Mail-order bride," she said, and even in her diminished state she heard the bitterness in her own voice. "But he married someone else." There was a long pause, filled only with the sound of hoofbeats muffled by snow and the whistle of wind. Then, "Edward Langford? You know him?" "Everyone knows everyone here, Miss Turner. And yeah, I heard he married Susanna Pritchard. Didn't hear he had a bride coming from back east." His voice hardened. "That bastard knew. He knew, and didn't even have the decency to send you a telegram." Isabel had no response to that. The betrayal was too fresh, too raw. And besides, her thoughts were starting to scatter again, pulled apart by cold and exhaustion. "Stay awake," Gideon commanded, giving her a small shake. "Talk to me. Where you from?" "Boston," she mumbled. "Commonwealth Avenue." "Long way from home." "No home," Isabel corrected. "Not anymore." She felt rather than saw him glance down at her. "We'll figure it out," he said finally. "But first, we keep you alive." The ride seemed to take hours, though it was probably only 20 minutes. Isabel drifted in and out of awareness, registering impressions more than details. The solid warmth of the man behind her, the rhythmic motion of the horse, the snow that seemed to fall from every direction at once. Once, she thought she might have seen lights in the distance, warm, golden squares that suggested civilization and survival. "Almost there," Gideon said, and Isabel realized he'd been talking to her the whole time, a steady stream of words meant to keep her conscious. "And the Iron Willow's been in my family for 10 years now, built it up from nothing, me and my sister Evelyn. She's going to have some strong words about me bringing home a half-frozen woman, but don't let her scare you. Her bark's worse than her bite. Mostly." "Sister?" Isabel repeated, latching onto the word. "A woman." She wouldn't be alone with this strange man in the wilderness. That should have been comforting, but she was too cold to feel much of anything except the desperate need to survive. The ranch appeared out of the storm, like something from a dream, a sprawling house with lamplight glowing in the windows, surrounded by outbuildings that provided some break from the wind. Gideon guided his horse to the barn, calling out as they approached, "Evelyn, need help out here." The barn door swung open, revealing a woman in men's trousers and a heavy flannel shirt, her dark hair pulled back in a practical braid. She took one look at Isabel, and her eyes went wide. "Jesus, Gideon, what?" Found her freezing at the station. Edward Langford's mail-order bride. "That son of a..." Evelyn bit off the curse and hurried forward. "Get her inside. I'll take care of your horse. Go. Move." Gideon dismounted with Isabel still in his arms, carrying her like she weighed nothing. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and she had a confused impression of being borne across a threshold. How ironic, she thought dimly, to be carried over a threshold by a man who wasn't her husband, who would never be her husband. The warmth of the house hit her like a wall. After the brutal cold outside, it felt painful, pins and needles prickling across her skin. She whimpered. "I know," Gideon said softly. "I know it hurts." "That's good. Pain means the blood's flowing." He carried her to a chair near the fireplace and set her down gently, then knelt to work off her frozen boots. "Miss Turner, I need to check your feet. May I?" Isabel nodded, beyond caring about propriety. She watched through half-closed eyes as he peeled away her boots. The leather had gone stiff with cold, and then her stockings. Her feet were white with patches of gray, and she still couldn't feel them. Gideon's mouth tightened into a grim line. "Not good, but I've seen worse. Evelyn," he called toward the door. "Get the warm water basin. Not hot, warm. And bandages." "Already on it," came the shouted response. He looked up at Isabel, and she saw real concern in those storm-gray eyes. "Your hands next. Let me see them." She tried to hold them out, but they wouldn't cooperate. Gideon took them in his own. His hands were large, calloused, scarred from work and weather, and began to massage them gently, methodically. His touch was impersonal but kind, the way someone might handle an injured animal. "You're going to be all right," he said, and it sounded like a promise. "You hear me, Miss Turner? You're going to be all right." Isabel wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. But the day had taught her that belief was dangerous, that trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. Still, as warmth began to creep back into her fingers, painful, burning warmth, she found herself nodding. "Isabel," she whispered. "Just Isabel." Something shifted in his expression, softened almost. "All right, Isabel, I'm Gideon." He continued his steady massage, never breaking eye contact. "You're safe here. I promise you that." Evelyn burst back through the door, carrying a basin of water that steamed gently in the firelight. She set it down and immediately took over, shooing Gideon back. "Go change," she ordered. "You're dripping snow all over my clean floor. I'll take care of her." Gideon hesitated, then nodded and stood. He touched Isabel's shoulder briefly, a gesture of reassurance, and then disappeared through a doorway into what she assumed was another part of the house. Evelyn knelt where her brother had been and began to lower Isabel's feet into the warm water. The sensation was agonizing, like being stabbed with thousands of tiny needles, and Isabel couldn't stop the cry that escaped her lips. "I know, honey, I know." Evelyn's voice was surprisingly gentle. "But we've got to get the blood moving. Tell me about Boston. I've never been to a city. Is it as grand as they say?" Isabel understood the distraction technique, but she grabbed onto it anyway, gasping out descriptions of theaters and parks and the harbor while Evelyn worked on her feet and then her hands. The woman was efficient and confident, clearly experienced with frontier medicine. "You're lucky Gideon found you when he did," Evelyn said, wrapping Isabel's feet in soft flannel bandages. "Another hour and you'd have been past saving. What in God's name were you thinking, sitting out there in a blizzard?" "I wasn't," Isabel admitted. "Thinking, I mean. I didn't know what else to do." Evelyn's expression darkened. Edward Langford ought to be horsewhipped, leaving a woman stranded like that. And Susanna Pritchard, she knew about you. Half the town knew he had a bride coming. She married him anyway. She shook her head in disgust. "Some people got no shame. I suppose I should have confirmed before I came. Written another letter, but he seemed so certain, and Isabel trailed off. How could she explain the desperation that had driven her west? The bone-deep loneliness of being unmarried at 23 in a society that viewed spinsters as failures. The suffocating feeling of waking up every morning in the same room, the same house, the same life that stretched ahead like a prison sentence. "You wanted something different," Evelyn said quietly. "Nothing wrong with that. Took guts to come out here alone." "Or stupidity. Sometimes they're the same thing." Evelyn stood and brushed off her hands. "All right, your circulation's coming back. You're going to be sore for a few days, but I think we got to you in time. No permanent damage, thank the Lord. Now, let's get you out of these wet clothes and into something warm. Can you stand?" Isabel tried, but her legs buckled immediately. The room spun. "Whoa there!" Evelyn caught her, surprisingly strong for her lean frame. "Gideon!" she bellowed. "Need you!" He reappeared almost instantly, now dressed in dry clothes, dark trousers, and a thick wool shirt. Without a word, he scooped Isabel up again. "Guest room?" he asked his sister. "Where else? I'll bring up some of my clothes. She's taller than me, but we'll make do." Gideon carried Isabel up a narrow staircase, his footsteps sure despite the burden in his arms. The guest room was small but clean, with a brass bed covered in quilts and a window that looked out onto the storm. He set her down on the bed carefully. "Evelyn will help you change," he said, already backing toward the door. I'll be downstairs if you need anything." He was gone before Isabel could thank him, the door closing with a soft click. Evelyn bustled in a moment later with an armload of clothes. "Men," she said with affectionate exasperation, "can face down a charging bull without blinking, but put them in a room with a woman in wet clothes and they turn into nervous schoolboys. Let's get you sorted." With Evelyn's help, Isabel stripped out of her traveling dress. The green wool was soaked and would probably never recover, and into a soft flannel nightgown and thick socks. Every movement hurt. Her body was waking up from its near-death experience, and it was angry about it. "Into bed with you," Evelyn commanded, pulling back the quilts. "I'll bring you some soup and tea. You need to warm up from the inside, too." Isabel climbed beneath the covers, and it was like being wrapped in clouds. The bed was soft, the quilts were heavy and warm, and for the first time in 8 days, she felt something close to safe. "Why are you doing this?" she asked as Evelyn tucked the blankets around her. "You don't know me. I could be anyone." Evelyn paused, her hand resting on the quilt. "Could ask you the same question. You don't know us either, yet you let my brother bring you here. Let me tend to you. Sometimes, Isabel Turner from Boston, you've got to trust that people are decent, and anyone abandoned by Edward Langford deserves better than she got." Before Isabel could respond, Evelyn was gone, her footsteps clattering down the stairs. Alone, Isabel let herself sink into the mattress, every muscle releasing at once. Through the window, she could see the snow falling in thick curtains, burying the world in white. 20 minutes later, an hour earlier, she'd been dying in that snow. Now she was warm, dry, and safe. But safe with strangers. In a house in the middle of nowhere, with no money, no prospects, and nowhere to go. She should have been terrified. Instead, exhaustion pulled at her like a riptide, dragging her down into darkness. Her last conscious thought was of Gideon Walsh's hands, scarred and gentle, warming her frozen fingers back to life. When Isabel woke, daylight was filtering through the window in weak gray shafts. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside buried in pristine white. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then it all came flooding back. The station, the cold, the stranger on the black horse. She sat up slowly, assessing the damage. Her feet ached, her hands were stiff, and her body felt like she'd been beaten with clubs. But she was alive. Against all odds, she was alive. Someone had left clothes folded on the chair beside the bed. A simple brown dress, undergarments, more thick socks. Isabel dressed slowly, wincing at every movement. The dress was too short, ending above her ankles, and too loose in places, but it was clean and warm. She found her way downstairs by following the smell of coffee and bacon. The ranch house was larger than she'd realized in last night's confusion. A main room with the fireplace, a kitchen off to one side, other rooms branching away that she couldn't see into. Everything was well-worn but clean, practical rather than pretty. Evelyn was at the stove, stirring something in a large pot. She glanced over her shoulder when Isabel appeared. "Morning. You look better, less like a corpse." "Thank you." Isabel wasn't quite sure how to respond to that. Thank you for everything. The clothes, the bed, the care. I don't know how I can ever repay you." "You can start by eating." Evelyn ladled what turned out to be oatmeal into a bowl and set it on the table. "Coffee's hot. Help yourself." Isabel sat down gratefully. The oatmeal was plain but good, and the coffee was strong enough to wake the dead. She ate in silence, hyper-aware of Evelyn's periodic glances. Finally, the other woman spoke. "Gideon went into town this morning. Fetched your trunk from the station. It's in the front room." Relief flooded through her. Oh, thank God, everything I own is in that trunk. He also had some words with Edward Langford. Isabel's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. Words? Strong words. Evelyn's smile was sharp. Let's just say Edward won't be showing his face around here anytime soon. Gideon has a long memory and no patience for men who mistreat women. Isabel didn't know how to feel about that. Grateful, certainly, but also uncomfortable. She'd already been enough trouble to these people. I need to figure out what to do, she said quietly. I can't stay here indefinitely. Why not? The question was so blunt that Isabel blinked. Because I'm a stranger. Because you have your own lives. Because it's not proper. Proper? Evelyn snorted. This is Montana territory, honey. Proper is what keeps you alive, not what some society matron back east says. You need a place to stay until the pass clears and the trains are running regular again. We've got the room. Seems simple enough to me. But I can't pay you. I have almost nothing. Then earn your keep. Lord knows I could use help around here. Can you cook? Yes. Sew? Yes. Clean, mend, basic ranch work? I can learn. Evelyn studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Then that's settled. You stay here, help out where you can, and when the weather breaks and you figure out what you want to do next, you can do it from a position of strength rather than desperation. Deal? Isabel wanted to cry. The generosity was overwhelming, especially after yesterday's cruelty. Deal, she whispered. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I work you hard. But Evelyn's smile was warm. Now, finish your breakfast. Gideon will be back soon, and he'll want to know you're all right. As if summoned by his name, the front door opened, letting in a gust of cold air. Gideon stamped snow off his boots and hung his hat on a peg by the door. When he saw Isabel sitting at the table, something crossed his face. Relief, maybe. You're up, he said. How do you feel? Sore? Alive? Grateful. Isabel met his eyes. Mr. Walsh, I don't know how to thank you properly. You saved my life. Gideon, he corrected, and you don't need to thank me. Any decent person would have done the same. But you did do it. You didn't have to stop. You could have ridden past. He looked uncomfortable with the praise, shifting his weight. Your trunk's in the front room. Everything seemed intact, though the lock's a bit rusty. Evelyn told me. Thank you for retrieving it. Isabel hesitated, then added, She also said you spoke with Mr. Langford. Gideon's expression hardened. That's one way to put it. Gideon punched him, Evelyn called cheerfully from the stove. Broke his nose. Evelyn. What? I'm proud of you. Someone needed to do it. Isabel didn't know whether to be appalled or gratified. Violence shouldn't be the answer, her Boston upbringing insisted. But another part of her, a part she was just discovering, felt a savage satisfaction at the image of Edward Langford's smug face rearranging under Gideon Walsh's fist. I hope you didn't get in trouble on my account, she said carefully. Sheriff understands. Edward's lucky I stopped at one punch. Gideon poured himself coffee, his movements stiff with suppressed anger. Man like that, leaving a woman stranded in a blizzard. If you died, it would have been murder in my book. But I didn't die because of you. Isabel took a breath. Evelyn has kindly offered to let me stay here until I figure out my next steps. I hope that's acceptable to you as well? Gideon looked at his sister, who stared back with an expression of pure innocence. Some wordless communication passed between them, the kind only siblings could manage. Finally, he nodded. Of course it's acceptable. Like Evelyn said, we've got the room. He paused, then added, But you should know, Miss Turner, Isabel, this ranch is isolated. We're 5 miles from town, and in winter we can get snowed in for days at a time. It's not an easy life out here. I didn't come west looking for easy, Isabel said quietly. I came looking for purpose, for a place where I could be useful, where I could matter. If you'll let me stay and work, I promise I'll earn my keep. Gideon studied her with those storm-gray eyes, and Isabel had the unsettling feeling that he could see right through her, past the proper Boston manners to the desperate, determined woman beneath. All right then, he said finally. Welcome to the Iron Willow, Isabel Turner. Let's see what you're made of. The first week passed in a blur of aching muscles and small victories. Isabel discovered that ranch life bore no resemblance whatsoever to the romantic notion she'd harbored back in Boston, where cowboys existed primarily in dime novels, and the wilderness was something viewed safely through train windows. The reality was brutal, unforgiving, and strangely exhilarating. She woke before dawn that first full morning, roused by the sound of boots on floorboards and the low murmur of voices below. Her body protested every movement, the aftermath of her near-death experience combined with exhaustion from the long journey west. But she forced herself up, dressed in Evelyn's borrowed clothes, and made her way downstairs to find Gideon already gone and Evelyn stoking the fire in the kitchen stove. "You didn't have to get up so early," Evelyn said without turning around. "You should rest another day at least." "I'm not an invalid," Isabel replied, more sharply than she intended, then softer. "I'm sorry. I need to be useful. Please." Evelyn glanced over her shoulder, and something in her expression shifted, a flicker of understanding. "All right then, can you make biscuits?" By noon, Isabel had learned that her Boston biscuits, light, fluffy things made with careful measurements and a gentle hand, were utterly inadequate for ranch life. Evelyn's biscuits were dense, filling, designed to stick to ribs and sustain men doing brutal physical labor in sub-zero temperatures. She'd also learned that cooking on a wood stove required constant attention, that water had to be hauled from the well and heated for everything, and that her carefully manicured hands were woefully unprepared for the rough work of frontier domesticity. But she didn't complain. Not when her palms blistered from the water pump, not when she burned herself on the stove, not when Evelyn corrected her technique for the third time with barely concealed impatience. Isabel had meant what she said. She needed to be useful. More than that, she needed to prove to herself that she could survive out here, that answering that advertisement hadn't been the worst mistake of her life. Gideon came in for the midday meal covered in snow and smelling of hay and horses. He nodded to Isabel, accepted the plate she handed him, and ate in silence while Evelyn reported on the day's domestic progress with the kind of detail Isabel suspected was more for her brother's benefit than necessary. "She's a hard worker," Evelyn concluded. "Doesn't quit, even when her hands are shaking from exhaustion. Stubborn as a mule." "That a compliment?" Isabel asked, unsure whether to be offended. "Out here?" "Yes," Evelyn grinned. "You'll do fine, Boston." The nickname stuck. To Evelyn, she became Boston, said sometimes with affection, sometimes with exasperation, but always with a warmth that made Isabel feel less like a charity case and more like, well, if not family, then at least a friend. Gideon remained more distant, though not unkind. He was simply absent most of the time, spending long hours checking on the cattle, repairing fences damaged by the storm, breaking ice on water troughs. When he was in the house, he was quiet, answering questions with few words, disappearing into his own thoughts. Isabel caught him watching her sometimes, quick glances when he thought she wasn't looking, but whenever their eyes met, he'd look away, a faint color rising in his weathered cheeks. The second week brought another storm, this one even fiercer than the first. For 3 days, the world outside disappeared behind walls of white. The wind howled like something alive and hungry, battering at the windows, finding every crack and gap in the house's defenses. Isabel learned what true isolation meant. Not the loneliness of an unmarried woman in a crowded city, but the absolute elemental solitude of being cut off from civilization entirely. But strange as it was, she didn't mind. The ranch house felt solid and safe. Evelyn's constant chatter filled the silence, and there was something almost cozy about being trapped inside while the storm raged. They cooked, mended clothes, played cards in the evening while Gideon read by the fireplace. Isabel found herself relaxing in a way she never had in Boston, where every social interaction had been a careful dance of propriety and judgment. "Tell me about your family," Evelyn said one afternoon as they sat together sewing, the wind rattling the windows. "You mentioned you had a sister?" Isabel's needle paused. "Charlotte. She's 2 years younger than me. Very beautiful, very accomplished. Everything a Boston lady should be." "And you're not?" "According to my mother, no. I read too much. I asked too many questions. I have opinions about politics and business, which apparently makes me unmarriageable. Isabel's laugh was bitter. Charlotte will marry her accountant next spring. They'll have a proper courtship, a proper wedding, a proper life. While you came west looking for something different, Evelyn finished. Nothing wrong with that, Boston. Takes courage to break from what's expected. Or foolishness. I still can't decide which. Evelyn's needle flashed in the lamplight, her movements quick and sure. Can be both. Most brave things are. You think I wanted to come out here? I was 14 when our parents died. Fever took them both within a week. Gideon was 17, and suddenly he had me and our 2 younger brothers to raise. We could have gone back to Pennsylvania, lived with relatives. But Gideon, stubborn as always, decided we'd make it on our own. Sold everything, bought this land, built this ranch from nothing. You have other brothers? This was the first Isabel had heard of them. Had. Thomas and William. Evelyn's voice went flat, carefully controlled. Thomas died of pneumonia the first winter. William got kicked by a horse 3 years later. It's just been me and Gideon ever since. I'm so sorry, Isabel whispered, inadequate words for such loss. Life out here is hard. People die. You learn to keep going. Evelyn bit off her thread with sharp teeth. But what I'm saying is, sometimes the brave thing and the foolish thing are the same. Gideon could have taken the easy path, accepted help from family. Instead, he chose the hard way. And yeah, we lost people. But we also built something that's ours. Isabel thought about that as she returned to her sewing, her needle pulling thread through fabric in a rhythm that was becoming familiar. She'd chosen the hard path too, answering that advertisement, coming west. The fact that it had gone wrong didn't necessarily mean the choice itself had been wrong. Maybe, just maybe, it had simply been the wrong man, at the right time, leading her to where she was actually meant to be. That evening, Gideon came in from his workshop with something wrapped in cloth. He set it on the table near the fire, then paused, looking almost shy. I made something. For you, Isabel. If you want it. Curiosity piqued, Isabel unwrapped the cloth to reveal a wooden horse, about 6 inches tall, carved with extraordinary detail. Every line of muscle was visible beneath the smooth wood. The mane flowed as if caught by wind, and the eyes, impossibly, seemed alive, intelligent. It was beautiful in a way that made her throat tight. Gideon, she breathed, this is incredible. He shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. I carve. When I have time. Helps me think. Figured you could use something to remind you that not all cowboys are bastards like Edward Langford. Isabel cradled the horse in her hands, feeling the smoothness of the wood, the care evident in every carved line. I'll treasure it, she said honestly. Thank you. Their eyes met across the firelit room, and something passed between them. An understanding, perhaps. A recognition. Then Gideon cleared his throat and turned away, busying himself with banking the fire for the night. But that night, Isabel set the wooden horse on the table beside her bed, and it was the last thing she saw before sleep claimed her. The days developed a rhythm. Isabel rose early, helped Evelyn with breakfast and the endless domestic tasks that sustained ranch life. She learned to bake bread that didn't require pounding into submission, to recognize when beans were properly soaked, to stretch food supplies through careful planning. Her hands grew rough, calloused, capable. Her body adapted to the physical demands, muscles developing where she'd never had them before. In the afternoons, when weather permitted, she'd bundle up and venture outside. Never far, always within sight of the house, but far enough to feel the vastness of Montana pressing in around her. The sky here was bigger than any sky in Boston, a dome of blue or gray that stretched from horizon to horizon without buildings to interrupt it. The silence was profound, broken only by wind, the occasional cry of a bird, the lowing of cattle in the distance. Sometimes Gideon would appear while she was outside, mounted on his black horse. She'd learned his name was Midnight, which seemed almost too perfectly fitting to be real. He'd pause in whatever task had brought him near the house, and they'd talk. Brief conversations at first, stilted and careful, but gradually they grew longer, easier. You miss Boston? He asked one afternoon, his breath fogging in the frigid air. Isabel considered the question honestly. I miss my family, my father especially, but Boston itself? No. I don't think I ever really belonged there. You think you belong here? I don't know yet. Ask me when spring comes. Gideon's smile was slight but genuine. Fair enough. Another day, she asked him about the ranch's name. The Iron Willow. It seems contradictory. That's the point, he said, leaning forward in his saddle. Willow trees, they bend in storms. They're flexible, adaptable. But they're also tough, nearly impossible to kill. Iron's strong but brittle, break under too much pressure. The name's supposed to remind us to be both, strong but flexible. Tough, but able to bend when we need to. And are you? Isabel asked. Able to bend? Something flickered in his eyes. Old pain, old memories. I'm learning. Lost too many people by being too rigid, too stubborn. Sometimes I think if I'd been willing to ask for help, accept support. He trailed off, then shook his head. But we can't change the past. Only learn from it. These conversations revealed pieces of the man beneath the quiet exterior. Isabel learned that Gideon read voraciously. He had a small collection of books, mostly practical volumes on animal husbandry and weather patterns, but also poetry, Shakespeare, even some novels. He taught himself to read better after his parents died, determined to educate his siblings. She learned that he was 31 years old, had never been married, had never even courted seriously. Too busy raising his family, building his ranch, too full of responsibilities to think about his own wants. Don't you get lonely? She asked once, then immediately regretted the personal question. But Gideon didn't seem offended. He looked out across the white expanse of his land, his expression thoughtful. Sometimes. But loneliness is different than being alone. Alone can be peaceful. Lonely is... He paused. Lonely is being surrounded by people and still feeling like nobody sees you. Isabel understood that better than she could express. It was exactly how she'd felt in Boston. Invisible in a crowded room, unheard despite speaking, unseen despite being looked at. The understanding created another thread of connection between them, invisible but strong. The third week brought a break in the weather. The storms paused, the sun emerged, and the world became a blinding landscape of white and blue. Gideon spent longer hours outside, making up for time lost during the blizzards. And on a clear, bitterly cold morning, disaster struck. Evelyn was in town, her first trip since Isabel's arrival, taking advantage of the clear roads to stock up on supplies. Isabel was alone in the house when she heard it. A tremendous crash from the barn, followed by the panicked shrieking of horses. She didn't think. She just grabbed Gideon's spare coat from the peg by the door, jammed her feet into boots, and ran. The cold hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath. But she pushed forward, following the sounds of distress. The barn door was partially open, and inside was chaos. One of the support beams had given way under the weight of snow on the roof, bringing down a section of hayloft. And beneath it, partially buried under broken wood and hay bales, was Gideon. No, Isabel breathed, then louder. Gideon! She scrambled over debris, heedless of splinters and sharp edges. His face was visible, turned to the side, his eyes closed. Blood matted his hair and trickled down his temple. One of his arms was trapped beneath a massive hay bale, and his breathing was shallow, labored. Gideon, can you hear me? Isabel's hand shook as she touched his face. His skin was cold, but not frozen. Thank God, thank God. Gideon, please wake up. No response. His chest continued its shallow rise and fall, but otherwise he was terrifyingly still. Isabel assessed the situation with a clarity born of pure terror. She couldn't move the hay bale. It had to weigh 300 pounds at least. She couldn't go for help. Town was 5 miles away, and by the time she walked there and brought someone back, he could be dead from exposure or internal injuries. She needed to get him out herself, and she needed to do it now. Her eyes fell on a long piece of timber, part of the collapsed beam. It could work as a lever if she positioned it right. Isabel grabbed it, jamming one end under the hay bale and bracing the middle against a stable section of the loft frame. This is insane, she muttered to herself. This is absolutely insane, but so is everything else about my life right now. She threw her weight against the makeshift lever. Nothing happened. She tried again, harder, feeling the timber dig into her shoulder. The hay bale shifted, barely an inch, but it shifted. Encouraged, Isabel repositioned herself and pushed with every ounce of strength she possessed, screaming with effort. The bale moved. Slowly, agonizingly, it rose enough for Isabel to kick it sideways, sending it tumbling off Gideon's arm. She dropped the timber and fell to her knees beside him, her hands flying over his body, checking for obvious breaks or bleeding. His arm was at an odd angle, dislocated shoulder or broken collarbone, maybe both. The head wound was bleeding, but not catastrophically. His breathing was stronger now, no longer restricted by the weight on his chest. But he still wasn't waking up, and Isabel knew, from books, from conversations overheard at dinner parties back in Boston, that unconsciousness following a head injury was dangerous. "I need to get you inside," she said, even though he couldn't hear her. "I need to get you warm and awake and make sure you're not dying because you saved my life. And I'll be damned if I let you die saving your own ranch from your own barn." She was babbling, she knew, but it helped her think. Dragging him was the only option. Isabel grabbed Gideon under his armpits, careful of his injured arm, and pulled. He was solid muscle and easily outweighed her by 70 pounds, but terror gave her strength. Inch by inch, foot by foot, she hauled him out of the barn and across the snow-covered ground toward the house. Her muscles screamed. Her back felt like it might snap. Her breath came in ragged gasps that burned her lungs with cold. But she didn't stop, couldn't stop, because stopping meant Gideon Walsh would die in the snow, and that was unacceptable. It took 15 minutes that felt like hours. By the time she got him through the door and onto the floor near the fireplace, Isabel was shaking so violently she could barely stand. But there was no time to rest. She built up the fire until it roared, then grabbed every blanket and quilt she could find, piling them over Gideon's still form. "Wake up," she commanded, patting his face, the side without blood. "Gideon, you need to wake up. Please wake up." His eyelids fluttered. Then, with agonizing slowness, they opened. His storm-gray eyes were unfocused, confused. "Isabel?" His voice was barely a whisper. What happened?" Relief hit her so hard she nearly sobbed. "The barn. A beam collapsed. You were trapped. I got you out, but you have to stay awake. Do you understand? You can't sleep. You might have a concussion." "You got me out?" He tried to sit up, gasped, and fell back. "My shoulder. I think it's dislocated. I don't know how to fix that." Isabel pressed her hand to his forehead, checking for fever. "We need to wait for Evelyn. She'll know what to do. You should have gotten help." Even injured, he was trying to be protective. "There was no time. And you would have done the same for me. You did do the same for me." Isabel grabbed his good hand, holding it tight. "Now stop talking and stay awake. Tell me about the first horse you ever broke." It was a random question, but it worked. Gideon's eyes focused on her face and he started talking, haltingly at first, then with more strength as the warmth from the fire and blankets penetrated his body. He told her about a wild stallion he'd caught at 19, about the weeks it took to earn the animal's trust, about the first ride that had ended with him flat on his back and the horse staring at him like he was an idiot. Isabel kept him talking, kept him engaged, monitoring his pupils for dilation, his speech for slurring. Her knowledge was academic, learned from books rather than practice, but it was better than nothing. When he started to drift, she'd squeeze his hand or ask another question, pulling him back. Finally, after what felt like years, the door burst open and Evelyn stumbled in, arms full of parcels. "Sorry I'm late. The roads were worse than I—" "Sweet Jesus." The parcels hit the floor. "What happened?" "Barn beam collapsed. He was trapped. Possible concussion. Definitely something wrong with his shoulder." The words tumbled out of Isabel in a rush. "I've been keeping him awake, but I don't know what else to do." Evelyn was already on her knees beside her brother, her hands gentle but sure as she examined him. "Dislocated shoulder. I can fix that, but it's going to hurt like hell. Isabel, hold his legs down. Gideon, bite on this." She handed him a leather strap from her belt. "On 3. One, she popped the shoulder back into place on one, and Gideon's scream, muffled by the leather, made Isabel's blood run cold. But almost immediately his breathing eased, the tension leaving his body. "Bastard move, sis," he gasped when he could speak. "You'd have tensed on three and made it worse. You know that." Evelyn turned to Isabel. "You did good, real good. He'd be dead without you." The words made something crack inside Isabel's chest. She'd saved him. After he'd saved her, she'd returned the favor. They were even now, or maybe not even at all, because how did you measure life against life, rescue against rescue? "I just did what you would have done," she said quietly. "Maybe, but you did it." Evelyn squeezed her shoulder. "You're tougher than you look, Boston." They got Gideon upstairs to his room, an ordeal that involved much swearing and strategic lifting, and Evelyn cleaned his head wound while Isabel hovered anxiously nearby. "Concussion for sure," Evelyn pronounced, "but not as bad as it could be. Someone needs to watch him tonight. Wake him every few hours. I'll take first shift, you take second." "I can take all of it," Isabel offered. "You've been traveling all day." Evelyn studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but call me if anything changes. And Boston, thank you for saving my idiot brother's life." After Evelyn left, Isabel pulled a chair beside Gideon's bed and settled in for what promised to be a long night. He drifted in and out of sleep, waking easily when she touched his hand or called his name. During one of his waking periods, near midnight, he looked at her with eyes that were clearer than they'd been. "You walked into a storm for me," he said quietly. "You barely know me, and you risked your life." "You did the same for me," Isabel countered. "On the platform. You didn't have to stop, but you did." "That's different." "How?" I'm used to this life, the danger, the risks. You're what? Some delicate Eastern flower?" Isabel heard the edge in her own voice. "I'm tougher than I look, Gideon Walsh. I have to be. Because if I'm not, then what was the point of coming out here? What was the point of surviving that train platform just to be useless when someone needed help?" Something shifted in his expression, a kind of wonder mixed with respect. "You're not useless. You're extraordinary." The word hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning Isabel wasn't quite ready to examine. She'd been called many things in her life, opinionated, stubborn, unmarriageable, but extraordinary? Never that. "Get some sleep," she said softly, uncomfortable with the intensity of his gaze. "I'll wake you in 2 hours." This time when he drifted off, his hand was still holding hers. The weeks that followed brought a shift in the household's dynamic. Gideon's recovery was slow. His shoulder needed time to heal, and the concussion left him with headaches and fatigue. For the first time since Isabel had arrived, he was forced to remain primarily inside, relegated to light work and clearly chafing against the restrictions. But it also meant he was present in a way he hadn't been before. Isabel saw him not just as the quiet rancher who appeared at meals, but as a man with depths she hadn't suspected. He was funny when he relaxed, with a dry wit that caught her off guard. He was patient, helping her understand the account books when Evelyn assigned her the task of organizing their records. And he was talented. His evenings were spent by the fire carving, and Isabel watched in fascination as horses emerged from blocks of wood under his capable hands. "Why horses?" she asked one evening, watching him work. "They're honest," he said simply. "A horse won't lie to you, won't pretend to be something it's not. If a horse trusts you, it's real. If it doesn't, well, you know where you stand." Unlike people, Isabel heard the unspoken words. Unlike men who wrote advertisements and then married someone else. Unlike a world built on social performances and careful pretense. "I like that," she said. "The honesty of it." He glanced up, his knife pausing mid-stroke. "You're honest, too. I've noticed that. You don't hide what you're thinking." "My mother would say that's a flaw." "Your mother's wrong." The simple statement, delivered without hesitation, made Isabel's chest feel tight. In Boston, her honesty had been something to correct, to moderate, to apologize for. Here, in this rough house at the edge of civilization, it was valued. They talked more after that, long conversations by the fire while Evelyn sat nearby with her mending. occasionally interjecting sharp commentary that made them both laugh. Isabel told them about Boston, not the glamorous version she'd imagined they'd want to hear, but the truth. The stifling social expectations, the endless rounds of meaningless social calls, the way she'd felt like a square peg being hammered into a round hole. In return, Gideon told her about building the ranch, about the early years when they'd barely survived, about the brother he'd lost to pneumonia and the guilt that still haunted him. "I should have done more," he said, staring into the fire. "Should have seen the signs earlier, gotten him to a doctor sooner." "You were barely older than a child yourself," Isabel said gently, "doing your best in impossible circumstances. Doesn't make it easier." "No," she agreed, "it doesn't. But that doesn't make it your fault either." These conversations, intimate and raw, wove between them like threads, creating something Isabel didn't have a name for. It wasn't quite friendship, too charged with awareness for that. It wasn't courtship either. Neither of them was courting. It was something else, something that made her heart beat faster when he smiled, that made her hyper-aware of his presence in a room. She was, Isabel realized with growing alarm, developing feelings for Gideon Walsh. Real feelings, not the desperate hope she'd felt toward Edward Langford's promises. This was different, rooted in who Gideon actually was rather than who she'd needed him to be. And that terrified her, because she had nothing to offer him. She was a mail-order bride rejected by another man, a woman with no prospects and no future beyond the charity of strangers. What could someone like her possibly mean to someone like him? But late at night, when she couldn't sleep, Isabel would remember the way he'd looked at her in his fevered state, the word extraordinary hanging between them like a promise. And she'd let herself wonder, just for a moment, if maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the only one feeling something shift. Spring was coming. She could feel it in the air, in the way the light changed, in the slow retreat of snow from the southern slopes. When the past cleared, the world would open up again. She'd have to make decisions about her future, about where she'd go and what she'd do. But for now, in the warm glow of the firelight, with Gideon's hands shaping wood into beauty and Evelyn's laughter filling the room, Isabel let herself exist in this moment. Let herself belong, even if only temporarily, to this place and these people who'd saved her life and given her something more valuable than survival. They'd given her hope. The moment Isabel acknowledged her feelings, everything became both easier and infinitely more complicated. She found herself hyper-aware of Gideon's presence, the way he moved through a room, the sound of his voice reading aloud in the evenings, the rare moments when his serious expression broke into a genuine smile. And worse, she began to notice the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, his gray eyes holding something that made her breath catch. The last snows of March came and went, each storm less fierce than the one before. Gideon's shoulder healed enough for him to return to full work, and Isabel watched him disappear into the ranch's demands with something like mourning. The easy intimacy of those fireside evenings faded as reality reasserted itself. He left before dawn and returned after dark, exhausted and covered in mud from breaking ice, mending fences, checking cattle that had survived the winter. "He's preparing," Evelyn said one morning, watching Isabel watch the door Gideon had just exited. "Spring roundup starts soon. Once that begins, we won't see him for weeks except in passing." "Roundup?" Isabel forced herself to focus on the conversation rather than the ache in her chest. "Gathering the cattle, checking for losses, branding calves, moving the herd to spring pasture. It's the hardest work of the year." Evelyn poured them both coffee, her movements efficient. "He'll hire on some temporary hands from town. The house will be full of men eating us out of supplies and tracking mud everywhere." Isabel tried to imagine the quiet ranch house filled with cowboys and failed. "How long does it last?" 6 weeks, maybe 8 if we have trouble. And we always have trouble." Evelyn sat down heavily, suddenly looking older than her 30 years. "I hate this time of year. The work's brutal, the danger's constant, and every year I'm terrified Gideon's going to come back injured or not come back at all." The fear in Evelyn's voice resonated with something in Isabel's own chest. The thought of Gideon in danger, of something happening to him out on the range where help was hours away, made her feel physically ill. When had this man become so important to her? When had his safety become tangled up with her own sense of well-being? "He's careful though, isn't he?" Isabel asked, hating the tremor in her voice. Evelyn's look was knowing, sympathetic. Careful as he can be. But cattle don't care about careful, and neither does weather or terrain. Last year he broke 2 ribs when a steer charged him. Year before that, his horse went lame, and he walked 15 miles back in a storm. She reached across the table and squeezed Isabel's hand. He'll be fine, he always is, but I understand why you're worried. Isabel wanted to protest that she wasn't worried, not particularly that Gideon Walsh was just the man who'd saved her life and she'd naturally feel some concern for his welfare. But the words stuck in her throat, transparent lies that Evelyn would see through immediately. I don't have the right to worry, she said instead. I'm just a guest here. Temporary. Are you? Evelyn's gaze was piercing. Boston, you've been here almost 2 months. You work as hard as anyone I've ever seen. You saved my brother's life. You're part of this ranch now, whether you realize it or not. The only question is whether you want to be. Before Isabel could formulate a response to that loaded statement, the door opened and Gideon stamped in, bringing cold air and the smell of horses with him. He looked between them, clearly sensing the tension. Bad time? He asked. Perfect time, Evelyn said, standing abruptly. I need to check the chickens. You two talk. She was out the door before either of them could protest, leaving behind a silence that felt charged with everything unspoken. Gideon poured himself coffee, his back to Isabel. Evelyn's not exactly subtle, is she? No. Isabel's hands wrapped around her own mug, seeking warmth. But she means well. She does. He turned, leaning against the counter, his expression unreadable. Isabel, we need to talk about what happens next. The pass will be clear in another week or 2. The trains will run regular again. Her stomach dropped. This was it. The conversation she'd been dreading. The one where he kindly but firmly reminded her that she couldn't stay here forever, that she needed to make plans, move on with her life. She lifted her chin, preparing herself for the inevitable dismissal. I know, she said, proud that her voice was steady. I've been thinking about it. I could go to Helena, maybe find work as a teacher or a seamstress. I'm educated enough to tutor, and my sewing's improved considerably under Evelyn's instruction. I have a little money left, enough for a room while I look for employment. You've both been so generous, but I can't impose forever. Gideon's jaw tightened. Is that what you want? To go to Helena alone and work as a seamstress? Want doesn't enter into it. It's practical. It's sensible. Sensible. He said the word like it tasted bitter. You came all the way west to be sensible? To teach other people's children and sew other people's clothes and live in a boarding house alone? The frustration in his tone sparked something in Isabel's own chest. What else should I do, Gideon? Stay here indefinitely on your charity? Become your permanent house guest? The woman you rescued and felt too guilty to turn out? That's not a life either. That's just existing in limbo. What if it wasn't charity? The words burst from him, sharp and urgent. He set down his coffee with enough force to slosh liquid over the rim. What if I asked you to stay? Not as a guest, but as something else. Isabel's heart stuttered. Something else? He crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping just close enough that she could see the pulse jumping in his throat, the intensity in his gray eyes. I'm not good at this. Words, feelings, any of it. I'm better with horses and cattle and things that don't require me to... He stopped, frustrated, running a hand through his hair. I'm making a mess of this. Gideon. Isabel stood, bringing them nearly eye to eye. She was tall for a woman, and in her borrowed boots only a few inches separated them. What are you trying to say? That I don't want you to go. The confession seemed torn from somewhere deep inside him. That watching you prepare to leave is killing me. That every time I think about you in some Helena boarding house, alone and working yourself to exhaustion, I want to ride into town and burn every train ticket for sale. Hope, dangerous and bright, flared in Isabel's chest. You want me to stay? I want you to stay as my wife. The words came out in a rush, clumsy but honest. I want to marry you, Isabel. Not because I pity you or feel obligated, but because in the past 2 months you've become essential. You're the first thing I think about when I wake up and the last thought before I sleep. You're brave and stubborn and honest, and you walked into a storm to save me when you barely knew me. You're extraordinary." There was that word again, the one that had haunted her since the night of his injury. Isabel's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. "I'm a mail-order bride rejected by another man. I have nothing to offer you. No dowry, no connections, no... I don't care about any of that." Gideon's hands came up to frame her face, his touch gentle, despite the calluses. "I care about you. The woman who learned to make biscuits that could break teeth without complaining once, who hauled water until her hands blistered and never asked for easier work, who risked her life in a blizzard because someone needed help. That's who I want. That's who I'm asking to be my wife." Isabel couldn't breathe. This man, this strong, quiet man who carved beauty from wood and spoke so rarely but so meaningfully, wanted her, not despite who she was, but because of it. The enormity of it threatened to overwhelm her. "Say something," Gideon pleaded, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped despite her efforts. "Tell me I haven't completely misread this. Tell me you feel something too, or tell me to go to hell, but please, Isabel, say something." "I was supposed to marry a stranger," she whispered. "Someone I'd never met, someone I'd built fantasies around. And when that fell apart, I thought I'd made the worst mistake of my life. But Gideon, if Edward Langford had kept his promise, I never would have been on that platform. You never would have found me. I never would have ended up here, in this place, with you." Her own hands came up to cover his where they rested against her face. "I thought my life was over, but it was just beginning. Is that a yes?" His voice was rough with emotion. "That's an I love you." The words felt like jumping off a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating all at once. "I love you, Gideon Walsh. I love your quiet strength and your terrible coffee and the way you carve horses when you think no one's watching. I love that you see me, really see me, not as some Eastern lady who needs protecting, but as someone capable and strong. So yes, I'll marry you. If you're sure..." He kissed her. It was nothing like the chaste, proper kisses Isabel had imagined during her sheltered Boston upbringing. It was fierce and claiming, his arms pulling her close while her hands fisted in his shirt. She could taste coffee and something sweeter, could feel the thunder of his heart against her chest. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Gideon rested his forehead against hers. "I've never been more sure of anything," he said. "You scared me, you know. When I found you on that platform, half dead from cold, I thought my heart would stop. And then you stayed, and you fit into this life like you'd been born to it, and I kept telling myself not to feel what I was feeling. You'd leave when spring came. You'd go back east or on to somewhere else. You weren't mine to keep." "I am now," Isabel said fiercely. "If you'll have me, I'm yours." The door burst open and Evelyn stumbled in, her face alight with triumph. "Finally! Jesus, I thought I was going to have to lock you two in a room together." She crossed to them in 3 strides and pulled Isabel into a crushing hug. "Welcome to the family, sister. About damn time." "You were eavesdropping," Gideon accused, but there was no heat in it. "Of course I was eavesdropping. Someone had to make sure you didn't completely botch the proposal." Evelyn pulled back, her eyes suspiciously bright. "I'm happy for you both. Really happy." The rest of the day passed in a blur of planning and emotion. They decided on a simple ceremony in Wolf Creek's small chapel as soon as the minister could be notified. Evelyn immediately began mentally cataloging what needed to be done: a dress for Isabel, food for a small reception, notification to the few neighbors scattered across the territory. But as evening fell and they sat around the fire, reality began to creep back in. Isabel watched Gideon's face in the flickering light and saw the worry he was trying to hide. "What is it?" she asked quietly. Evelyn had excused herself early, giving them privacy that felt both welcome and exposing. "I'm not an easy man to be married to," he said finally. "This life, ranch life, it's brutal, Isabel. Long hours, hard work, isolation. Winters that'll try to kill you, summers so hot you can't breathe, roundup seasons where I'll be gone for weeks. Cattle that get sick, horses that go lame, money that's always tight. And children." He paused. "If we have children, they'll grow up rough. No fancy schools or city opportunities. Just this ranch and this land. Isabel considered his words carefully. He was right, of course. Life here would be nothing like Boston, nothing like what she'd been raised to expect. But that didn't frighten her the way he seemed to think it should. "Do you remember what I told you that first week?" she asked. "That I didn't come west looking for easy?" "I remember." "I meant it. Gideon, I don't want the life I left behind, the parties and social calls and endless, pointless routine. I want purpose. I want to build something that matters. And yes, it'll be hard, but hard doesn't mean not worthwhile." She moved closer to him on the settee, taking his scarred hand in hers. "As for children, if we're blessed with them, they'll grow up knowing the value of work and the beauty of this land. They'll be strong and capable. They'll be ours." "You're sure?" But she could hear the hope beneath his doubt. "I've never been more sure of anything, except maybe that I love you." He kissed her again, softer this time, and Isabel felt something settle in her chest, a sense of rightness, of coming home to a place she'd never been. When they broke apart, Gideon reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. "I made this," he said, suddenly shy. "I don't have a proper ring yet, but I wanted you to have something, to know this is real." Isabel unwrapped the cloth to reveal a wooden ring, carved from dark walnut and polished to a satin sheen. It was simple but perfect, fitting her finger as if made precisely for her, which, she realized, it had been. "It's beautiful," she whispered, watching firelight dance across the wood's grain. "When did you make this?" "Started it the night after you saved me from the barn. Finished it last week. I kept telling myself I was being foolish, that you'd never want a simple rancher, that I had no business even thinking about asking you, but I couldn't stop hoping." His thumb traced over the ring on her finger. "I'll get you a proper gold one when I can afford it." "I don't want a gold one. I want this." Isabel held up her hand, admiring how the ring looked against her work-roughened skin. "It's honest. It's you. That's what makes it perfect." They talked late into the night, making plans and sharing dreams. Gideon told her about his hopes for the ranch, expanding the herd, building a better barn, maybe eventually buying the adjacent property if it ever came up for sale. Isabel shared her own tentative ideas about starting a small garden, maybe raising chickens for eggs to sell in town, perhaps teaching some of the ranch hands' children to read if any families settled nearby. "You're already thinking like a rancher's wife," Gideon observed with a smile. "I'm thinking like your partner," Isabel corrected. "This is going to be our ranch, our life. We'll build it together." The word partner seemed to move him deeply. He pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. For the first time since leaving Boston, Isabel felt not just safe, but settled, like she'd finally found where she belonged. The next morning brought reality crashing back in the form of 6 cowboys riding up to the ranch. They were the temporary hands Gideon had hired for Roundup, and they were exactly as rough as Isabel had imagined, weathered, loud, and trailing an aroma of horse, leather, and tobacco. Evelyn met them at the door with her hands on her hips. "Rules are simple. No spitting inside, no tracking mud past the entry, no cursing where the ladies can hear you, and absolutely no whiskey until the work's done for the day. Break any rule, and you're fired on the spot. Understood?" A chorus of "yes, ma'am" followed, and Isabel suppressed a smile. Evelyn Walsh was all of 5'4" and built like a willow branch, but every one of those hardened cowboys looked appropriately cowed. Gideon introduced Isabel simply as Miss Turner, who'll be my wife come spring. The congratulations were genuine if boisterous, and Isabel found herself shaking hands with men whose grips could have crushed stone. They had names like Red and Slim and Dutch, and their faces held the kind of lines that came from lives lived entirely outdoors. The house transformed overnight. Where before it had been quiet and orderly, now it was chaos. Boots everywhere, men coming and going at all hours, the constant smell of coffee and bacon and wet wool. Isabel and Evelyn worked from before dawn until after dark, cooking massive meals, packing supplies for the men heading out to the far pastures, mending torn clothes and bandaging minor injuries. It was exhausting. It was also strangely exhilarating. Isabel felt useful in a way she never had in Boston, where her days had been filled with needlepoint and social calls. Here, her work mattered. If she didn't cook, men went hungry. If she didn't mend that torn shirt, Someone worked in the cold without proper protection. There was a direct line between her effort and real-world consequences. Gideon left before dawn on the third day, heading out to the far pastures with most of the hands. He found Isabel in the kitchen, already elbow-deep in bread dough, and pulled her aside. "I'll be gone 4, maybe 5 days," he said, his hands resting on her waist. "We're gathering the cattle from the northern range. It's the farthest out, the most dangerous terrain." "Be careful," Isabel said, hating how worried she sounded. "Always am." He kissed her forehead. "When I get back, we'll set the wedding date. Soon as possible, if that's all right with you." "The sooner the better," she agreed, and his smile was bright enough to warm her for days. But watching him ride away, his figure growing smaller against the vast Montana landscape, Isabel felt her first real taste of what it meant to be a rancher's wife. The waiting, the not knowing, the constant low-level fear that something might go wrong, miles from help, miles from her. "He'll be fine," Evelyn said, appearing at her elbow. "He's been doing this since he was barely old enough to ride. It's in his blood." "Do you ever get used to it, the worry?" "No." Evelyn's voice was matter-of-fact. "You just get better at living with it. Come on, Boston. Bread won't need itself, and those men will be back for supper hungry enough to eat the table." The days blurred together. Isabel fell into bed exhausted each night, her muscles screaming, her hands covered in new burns and cuts. But she also felt a satisfaction she'd never experienced before. This was real work, real purpose. She was building something, contributing something meaningful. On the evening of the fourth day, a commotion outside brought both women running. The men were returning, driving a small herd of cattle ahead of them. Isabel counted heads anxiously. 5, 6, 7, including Gideon. Everyone accounted for. The relief was dizzying. But as they got closer, she saw that one of the men was slumped in his saddle, and Gideon was riding close beside him, clearly providing support. Her heart lurched. "Get the medical supplies," Evelyn snapped, already moving toward the barn. "Looks like Slim took a spill." The injured man, Slim, who'd been so polite when they met, had a badly broken leg and possible cracked ribs. He'd been thrown when his horse stumbled in a prairie dog hole, and the journey back had been agonizing for everyone involved. Evelyn set the leg with practiced efficiency, while Slim bit down on a leather strap and tried not to scream. Isabel assisted, handing supplies and helping hold the cowboy still, her stomach churning but her hands steady. Afterward, Gideon found her alone in the kitchen, scrubbing blood from her hands at the basin. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "You did good today," he said quietly. "A lot of women would have fainted at the sight of that bone." "A lot of women didn't grow up reading every medical text in their father's library," Isabel countered, but she leaned back into his embrace, drawing strength from his solid presence. "Is he going to be all right? He'll heal. He'll won't be able to work the rest of the season, but he'll walk again. Evelyn's good at this." He paused. "This is part of it, Isabel. The danger I was talking about. Accidents happen out here, sometimes worse than broken bones." "I know." She turned in his arms to face him. "I'm not going to pretend I wasn't terrified when I saw someone was hurt. But Gideon, I'm also not going to fall apart at the first sign of trouble. You need to trust that I'm strong enough for this life." Something in his expression shifted, a last wall coming down. "I do trust it. I trust you. He struggled for words. "I've lost so many people, my parents, my brothers. The thought of losing you, of something happening and me not being there." "Then teach me," Isabel interrupted. "Teach me everything you know about surviving out here. Don't protect me from the truth of this life. Make me your partner in every sense. Can you do that?" Gideon searched her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Yeah, I can do that." "Good. Now go get cleaned up. You smell like cattle and sweat, and while that's probably very authentic, it's also very unpleasant for standing this close." His laugh was surprised and genuine, and he kissed her soundly before heading off to wash. Isabel watched him go, a smile playing at her lips. They were going to make this work. It wouldn't be easy, but nothing worthwhile ever was. The roundup continued through April and into early May. Each time Gideon left for the range, Isabel waited and worried. Each time he returned, sometimes exhausted, sometimes injured, always covered in dust, Her relief was profound. They stole moments when they could, brief conversations by the barn or quiet minutes after everyone else had gone to bed. It wasn't the courtship of her Boston upbringing, but it felt more real, more honest. In between the chaos of feeding cowboys and managing the household, Isabel and Evelyn began preparing for the wedding. It would be simple by necessity. The ranch couldn't afford to shut down for elaborate celebrations, and neither woman was particularly interested in fuss. But Isabel wanted it to be special, wanted the day to reflect what she and Gideon were building together. "What about your family?" Evelyn asked one afternoon as they worked on altering one of Evelyn's old dresses for Isabel to wear. "Should we send word? Your father might want to come." Isabel's hands stilled on the fabric. She hadn't written to her family since arriving in Montana, hadn't known what to say. How could she explain everything that had happened, the betrayal, the rescue, the way her entire life had changed in the span of 8 weeks? "I should tell them," she said slowly, "but I don't think they'll come. It's too far, too expensive, and my mother—" She trailed off, imagining her mother's reaction to the news that her eldest daughter was marrying a frontier rancher she'd known for barely 2 months. "My mother will think I've lost my mind." "Have you?" Evelyn's question was gentle, curious. "Maybe," Isabel smiled, "but if this is madness, I don't want to be sane. I'll write to my father. He deserves to know I'm happy, that I'm safe, that I found what I was looking for, even if it wasn't what I expected." That evening, by lamplight, Isabel composed the letter. It took 3 tries to get the tone right. Honest, but not defensive, joyful, but not naive. She told her father about the advertisement, about being abandoned, about the blizzard and the stranger who'd saved her. She told him about the ranch, about Evelyn's fierce kindness, about learning to make bread and haul water and survive in a place so different from Boston, it might as well be a different planet. And she told him about Gideon, about his quiet strength and careful hands, about the way he carved beauty from wood and built a life from nothing, about how he saw her not as a problem to be solved or a decoration to be displayed, but as an equal, a partner, someone worthy of respect. "I know this isn't the life you imagined for me," she wrote in closing. "I know Mama will be horrified and Charlotte will think I've gone wild. But Papa, I'm happy. Truly, deeply happy in a way I never was in Boston. I found my place, and it's here, with a man who loves me not despite my opinions and my stubbornness, but because of them. I hope someday you'll meet him and see what I see. A good man, an honest man, one who will spend his life trying to be worthy of the gift I'm giving him, even though he doesn't realize he already is. Give my love to Mama and Charlotte, and know that your faith in me, your willingness to let me go find my own path, gave me the courage to survive when things went wrong. I love you. Your daughter, Isabel." She sealed the letter before she could second-guess herself, and Gideon promised to post it when he next went to town. That night she dreamed of her father reading her words, of the smile she hoped would cross his weathered face. In her dream, he raised a glass and toasted her courage, her happiness, her new life. It was enough. The wedding was set for the second Sunday in May, after the worst of Roundup would be finished, but before the summer heat made travel unbearable. The minister sent word that he'd arrive Saturday evening and stay at the boarding house, ready to perform the ceremony after Sunday services. Invitations were extended to the scattered neighbors, to the ranch hands who'd worked the Roundup, to anyone in Wolf Creek who cared to attend. And one invitation, delivered by Gideon himself, went to Edward Langford. "Are you insane?" Evelyn demanded when she found out. "Why would you invite that bastard to your wedding?" "Because I want him to see what he missed," Gideon said calmly. "I want him to watch Isabel marry someone who actually deserves her. And I want him to know that his cruelty didn't break her, it just led her somewhere better." Isabel, when told, was surprised to find she agreed. There was something satisfying about the thought of Edward Langford witnessing her happiness, seeing that his betrayal had been, in the end, a gift. She'd been meant for something better than a marriage to a man who'd lie rather than face an uncomfortable conversation. The days before the wedding passed in a flurry of final preparations. The dress, pale blue rather than traditional white, practical enough to be worn again, fit perfectly after Evelyn's alterations. The ranch hands built extra tables and benches for the reception. Evelyn spent 2 days baking cakes and pies, recruiting Isabel's help but refusing to let her do too much. "You're the bride," Evelyn said firmly. "You should be resting, not kneading dough." "I don't know how to just rest," Isabel admitted. "I need to be doing something or I'll think too much." "Think about what? You're not having second thoughts, are you?" "No, God, no." Isabel sank into a chair, suddenly needing to articulate fears she'd barely acknowledged to herself. "I'm thinking about how happy I am and how that terrifies me. Every time I've let myself be happy, Evelyn, something's gone wrong. What if this is too good? What if I'm not meant for this much joy?" Evelyn set down her rolling pin and came to sit beside her, floury hands clasping Isabel's. "Listen to me, Boston. You are allowed to be happy. You are allowed to have good things. The universe doesn't work on some cosmic balance where suffering earns you joy. Life's random and cruel and beautiful all at once. You found happiness. Hold on to it. Fight for it. Don't let fear steal it before you even get to live it." The word settled something in Isabel's chest. She squeezed Evelyn's hands, grateful beyond measure for this fierce, practical woman who'd become more than a friend, who'd become the sister she'd always wanted. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for taking me in, for teaching me, for treating me like family when I had nowhere else to go." "You are family," Evelyn said simply. "From the moment Gideon carried you through that door, half frozen and twice as stubborn, you were family. The wedding just makes it official." Saturday arrived clear and bright, the kind of perfect spring day that felt like a blessing. The minister arrived as promised, a kindly older man who'd known Gideon since he was a boy. Neighbors began trickling in throughout the afternoon, bringing food and good wishes. The ranch hands cleaned up surprisingly well, appearing in pressed shirts and with hair actually combed. That evening, Isabel stood in her room, soon to be their room, hers and Gideon's, and looked at the blue dress hanging on the wardrobe door. Tomorrow, she would put it on and walk into the Wolf Creek Chapel. She would speak vows that would bind her to this land, this life, this man, and she would do it joyfully, without reservation, with her whole heart. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting Evelyn. But it was Gideon who entered, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I know it's bad luck to see the bride before the wedding," he said, "but I wanted to give you something, before tomorrow, before everything changes." He held out a small wooden box, carved with the same intricate detail as the horse he'd given her months ago. Isabel took it with trembling hands and opened the lid to find a ring, not wooden this time, but gold, simple and beautiful. "It was my mother's," Gideon said quietly, "the only thing of hers I kept. I've been saving it, thinking someday I'd give it to—" He trailed off, then started again. "I want you to have it, want you to wear it tomorrow when we say our vows. If you want to." Isabel's vision blurred with tears. "Gideon, this is precious. Your mother's ring should go to the woman who's going to be my wife, the mother of my children if we're blessed. Should go to you." He took the ring from the box and held it up. "May I?" She extended her left hand and he slipped the gold band onto her finger, right above the wooden ring he'd carved. They fit together perfectly, wood and gold, simple and precious. "I love you," Isabel said, the words coming easier each time she spoke them. "Tomorrow and every day after, I love you." "Tomorrow," Gideon agreed, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "We start forever." Morning came too quickly, and not soon enough. Isabel woke before dawn to find Evelyn already dressed and bustling about the kitchen, her nervous energy filling the house. The ranch hands had been banished to the bunkhouse with strict orders not to return until it was time to leave for the chapel, giving the women the house to themselves for preparations. "Did you sleep at all?" Evelyn asked, setting a cup of coffee in front of Isabel with hands that trembled slightly. "Some. Did you?" Not a wink, kept thinking about everything that could go wrong. Evelyn laughed shakily. "Ridiculous, isn't it? It's just a wedding. People get married every day." But it wasn't just a wedding, and they both knew it. It was Isabel choosing this life irrevocably. It was Gideon trusting his heart to someone after years of guarding it. It was the two of them building something new from the ashes of loss and loneliness. The weight of that significance pressed down on the morning, making every moment feel crystalline, important. Isabel barely tasted her breakfast. Her stomach was a knot of anticipation and nerves, excitement and terror all tangled together. She kept touching the rings on her finger, wood and gold, promise and permanence. In a few hours, she would stand before God and witnesses and bind herself to Gideon Walsh. The enormity of it was almost overwhelming. "Bath's ready," Evelyn called from the other room, and Isabel went gratefully, letting the warm water and Evelyn's steady chatter soothe her jumping nerves. They washed her hair, working rose-scented soap through the long strands until they gleamed. Evelyn had heated extra water just for this, a luxury on the ranch where every drop had to be hauled from the well. As Isabel dried and dressed in her undergarments, Evelyn disappeared and returned with something wrapped in tissue paper. "I made this," she said, suddenly shy. "For your dress." Something borrowed. It was a collar of delicate lace, hand-tatted with a skill Isabel hadn't known Evelyn possessed. The pattern was intricate, tiny flowers and leaves that must have taken hours to create. Isabel's throat went tight with emotion. "Evelyn, this is beautiful. When did you even have time, late at night after everyone was asleep? I wanted you to have something special, something that shows you're not just marrying Gideon, you're joining our family." Evelyn's eyes were suspiciously bright. "You're the sister I always wanted, Boston. I need you to know that." They hugged, fierce and hard, and for a moment they were just two women who'd found each other in unexpected circumstances, who'd built a friendship from necessity and discovered it was real affection underneath. When they pulled apart, both were blinking rapidly, trying not to cry before the ceremony even started. The dress slipped over Isabel's head like water, the blue fabric settling against her skin with a whisper. It wasn't elaborate, no bustle or train or excessive decoration, but it was lovely in its simplicity. Evelyn fastened the buttons up the back, then attached the lace collar, stepping back to assess her work. "You look beautiful," she said softly. "Gideon's not going to be able to breathe when he sees you." Isabel turned to the small mirror on the wall, barely large enough to see her face and shoulders. The woman looking back at her was almost a stranger, sun-touched skin, work-roughened hands, eyes that held a confidence she'd never possessed in Boston. This was who she'd become in the past months, someone capable, someone strong, someone worthy of the life she was choosing. They'd just finished pinning up Isabel's hair, a simple style that wouldn't blow apart in Montana wind, when a commotion outside made them both freeze. Through the window, they could see a buggy approaching, far fancier than anything that usually appeared at the Iron Willow. As it drew closer, Isabel's heart nearly stopped. She knew that buggy. It belonged to the Langfords, one of the wealthier families in Wolf Creek. And sitting beside Edward Langford, her hand possessively on his arm, was Susanna Pritchard, now Susanna Langford, Isabel supposed. "What is she doing here?" Evelyn's voice was dangerous. "He was invited. She wasn't." Isabel watched the couple climb down from their buggy, Edward looking uncomfortable in his Sunday suit, Susanna preening in an elaborate dress that must have cost more than the Iron Willow earned in a month. And suddenly, Isabel understood. Susanna had come to gloat, to see the woman her husband had rejected, to reinforce her own sense of superiority. Something hot and fierce kindled in Isabel's chest. 6 months ago, she might have hidden, might have let shame and embarrassment drive her inside. But she wasn't that woman anymore. She was Isabel Turner, soon to be Isabel Walsh, and she'd survived a Montana winter, saved a man's life, and learned to thrive in circumstances that would have broken her former self. Susanna Langford didn't frighten her. "Let them come," Isabel said quietly. "Let them see exactly what Edward threw away." Evelyn's grin was sharp as a knife. "That's my girl." They descended the stairs together, Isabel's head high, her bearing regal despite the simple dress. Edward and Susanna were being greeted by Red at the door, or more accurately, Red was blocking the door while trying to decide what to do with unexpected guests. He looked relieved when Evelyn appeared. "Miss Evelyn, these folks say they're invited." "Mr. Langford is invited," Evelyn interrupted smoothly. Mrs. Langford was not. However, in the spirit of Christian charity on this blessed day, I suppose we can accommodate one more guest. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Welcome to the Iron Willow." Susanna's gaze swept over Isabel, and something flickered in her expression, surprise, perhaps, at seeing how changed the Boston woman was. She'd clearly expected to find someone broken, pathetic. Instead, Isabel stood straight and confident, the iron willow stamp evident in her work-worn hands and sun-kissed face. "Miss Turner," Edward said, and he had the grace to look ashamed. That is, we wanted to offer our congratulations. I understand you're marrying Gideon Walsh today." "I am." Isabel's voice was steady, cool. "Though I can't imagine why you'd care, Mr. Langford, given that you couldn't be bothered to send me a telegram informing me of your changed circumstances." Direct hit. Edward flushed deep red, and Susanna's hand tightened on his arm. "Now see here," Susanna began. Edward had every right. To marry whomever he chose? Absolutely. Isabel cut her off with the kind of polite brutality she'd learned in Boston drawing rooms. Just as he had the responsibility to inform a woman traveling across the country that his circumstances had changed. But we needn't dwell on past discourtesies. I'm grateful, actually. If Edward had kept his word, I never would have met Gideon, and I never would have found my real home. She let that sink in, then added sweetly, "I hope you'll both enjoy the ceremony. The chapel's quite charming." She swept past them without waiting for a response, Evelyn at her side trying not to laugh. Once they were outside and away from the house, Evelyn let out a whoop of delight. "Boston, that was magnificent. Did you see her face? She looked like she'd swallowed a wasp." "I shouldn't have been so sharp," Isabel said, but she was smiling despite herself. It wasn't charitable. Charity is for people who deserve it. She came here to make you feel small. Instead, you made her feel invisible. That's justice, not cruelty. Evelyn linked their arms together. "Now come on. You've got a wedding to get to, and a man who's probably wearing a hole in the chapel floor from pacing." The ride into Wolf Creek was beautiful. Spring had fully arrived, painting the landscape in shades of green and gold. Wildflowers dotted the prairie, and the sky was so blue it hurt to look at. The ranch hands rode alongside the wagon, dressed in their best, acting as an informal honor guard. Despite the morning's unwelcome visitors, Isabel felt her spirits lift. This was her wedding day. Nothing was going to ruin it. The Wolf Creek Chapel was small and simple, built from local timber and love. As they approached, Isabel could see people gathered outside. Neighbors she'd met during the winter, ranch families from miles around. Townspeople who'd heard about the Eastern woman who'd survived abandonment and nearly freezing to death. They'd come to witness not just a wedding, but a story of survival and second chances. And standing at the chapel door, looking like he might come apart at any moment, was Gideon. He dressed with obvious care. Black suit that was probably older than Isabel, but well-maintained, white shirt so crisp it looked painful, boots polished to a shine. His hair was combed back, still damp from washing. But what made Isabel's breath catch was his expression when he saw her. Raw wonder mixed with such profound love that she felt it like a physical touch. Evelyn helped Isabel down from the wagon, then squeezed her hand. "Go get your husband, Boston." Isabel walked toward Gideon, aware of every eye on her but seeing only him. His gray eyes never left her face, and she watched his throat work as he swallowed hard, clearly struggling with emotion. "You're beautiful," he said when she reached him, his voice rough. "I mean, you're always beautiful, but today I don't have words. I'm just grateful you said yes." "Ask me every day," Isabel said softly. "I'll say yes every time." The minister appeared, kindly old Reverend Matthews, who'd baptized Gideon as a baby and buried his parents and brothers. "Shall we begin?" he asked, and they all filed into the chapel. Inside, the small space was packed. Isabel recognized faces from town, from the ranch, from neighboring spreads. The Coopers, who ran cattle 20 miles north. The Harrisons, whose daughter Evelyn had befriended, red and Dutch and slim, still on crutches, and all the other hands who'd worked roundup. And in the back pew, looking profoundly uncomfortable, sat Edward and Susanna Langford. Isabel didn't spare them a second glance. Her attention was entirely on Gideon as they stood before the Reverend, hands joined, the future spreading out before them like the Montana sky, vast and uncertain and full of possibility. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Matthews began, and his voice carried easily in the hushed space. "We are gathered here today to witness the joining of Gideon Walsh and Isabel Turner in holy matrimony. This is a sacred covenant, not to be entered into lightly, but reverently and with due consideration of its significance. He paused, looking at them over his spectacles. I've known Gideon since he was a boy. Watched him grow from a young man trying desperately to fill his father's shoes into the fine man standing before you now. He's worked harder than anyone should have to, sacrificed more than most could bear, all to build something lasting, something meaningful. And now he's found someone worthy of sharing that with him. The Reverend's gaze shifted to Isabel. And you, young lady, have shown remarkable courage. To travel across the country on faith alone, to survive betrayal and near death, to choose this hard life when you could return to comfort, that speaks to a strength of character that will serve you well in the years ahead. You've already proven yourself. Today, you choose to continue proving it, day after day, beside this man. He opened his Bible, but before reading, he added, Marriage in Montana isn't like marriage in easier places. This land tests you. The winters will try to freeze you, the summers will try to bake you, and the isolation will try to break you. You'll face hardships that would end lesser partnerships. But if you face them together, if you remember that you're partners rather than just husband and wife, you'll not only survive, you'll thrive. Now, shall we proceed? The ceremony was traditional, the words worn smooth by centuries of use. But when Gideon spoke his vows, his voice was steady and clear, carrying to every corner of the chapel. I, Gideon Walsh, take you, Isabel Turner, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, cherish you, in sickness and in health, in prosperity and in hardship, for as long as we both shall live. I promise to see you, to hear you, to value you for who you are. I promise to build a life with you, a home with you, a future with you. You saved my life once. I'll spend the rest of mine proving I'm worthy of that gift. Isabel's turn came, and her voice was steady despite the tears threatening to spill. I, Isabel Turner, take you, Gideon Walsh, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, cherish you, in sickness and in health, in prosperity and in hardship, for as long as we both shall live. I promise to stand beside you, to work beside you, to dream beside you. I promise to be your partner in all things. You gave me shelter when I had none, warmth when I was freezing, hope when I had nothing left. I'll spend my life building something beautiful with you. The Reverend smiled. The rings? Evelyn produced them from her pocket, Gideon's simple gold band that Isabel had purchased with the last of her money, and Isabel's 2 rings, wood and gold together. They exchanged them with hands that shook slightly, the physical symbols of promises already made and meant. By the power vested in me by the territory of Montana and by God above, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Reverend Matthew's voice was warm with approval. Gideon, you may kiss your bride. Gideon's hands came up to frame Isabel's face, gentle despite their roughness, and he kissed her with a tenderness that made the congregation sigh collectively. It was chaste. They were in church, after all, but it held a promise of deeper things to come. When they broke apart, both were smiling, and the chapel erupted in cheers and applause. They walked down the aisle together, husband and wife, and Isabel felt like she was floating. The faces around them were beaming, happy for them in that genuine frontier way where everyone's triumphs were celebrated because they were so hard won. Even Edward Langford was clapping, though his expression was complicated, regret perhaps or shame, or Susanna looked sour, but Isabel found she didn't care. That part of her life was over. This was the beginning of something new. Outside, the reception was already underway. Tables had been set up in the chapel yard, covered with food, roasted meats, fresh bread, pies and cakes, preserves and pickles. Someone had brought a fiddle, and music filled the air. Children ran between the adults, shrieking with joy, while older folks found seats in the shade. Gideon pulled Isabel close, his arm around her waist. "How does it feel to be Mrs. Walsh?" he asked. "Like coming home," she answered honestly. "Like I've been Isabel Walsh all along and just needed to make it official." They were immediately surrounded by well-wishers, accepting congratulations and handshakes and hugs from people who'd become neighbors and friends. Red pressed a carved wooden spoon into Isabel's hand. "For your kitchen, Mrs. Walsh." And Dutch offered a promise to help with any repairs the ranch house needed. Slim, on his crutches, just grinned and said, "You picked a good one, boss. She'll keep you honest." The Coopers brought a breeding pair of chickens. For that egg business you mentioned to my wife. And Mrs. Harrison gifted them a beautiful quilt, each square embroidered with scenes from ranch life. The generosity was overwhelming, and Isabel found herself repeatedly blinking back tears. Even Edward Langford approached eventually, Susanna nowhere in sight. He stood awkwardly before them, clearly struggling for words. "I owe you an apology," he finally said to Isabel. "A real one, not just social niceties. What I did was unconscionable. I knew you were coming, knew I'd changed my mind, and I was too cowardly to tell you. I told myself the letter must have gotten lost, that you wouldn't actually come, any excuse to avoid facing what I'd done. You could have died because of my cowardice. I'm sorry. Truly and deeply sorry." Isabel studied him for a long moment. He looked genuinely remorseful, his shoulders slumped, his eyes unable to meet hers directly. She thought about holding on to anger, about making him suffer for what he'd put her through. But what was the point? She was happy. She'd found something better. Carrying grudges would only poison her joy. "I accept your apology," she said finally. "What you did was cruel, but Mr. Langford, if you'd kept your word, I would be your wife right now. And I would never have met Gideon, never would have found this life. So in a strange way, your betrayal was a gift. I hope you and Susanna are happy, but more than that, I hope you learn to be honest, especially with women who trust you." Edward nodded, looking relieved and still ashamed in equal measure. "He's a good man," he said, glancing at Gideon. "Better than me, that's for certain. You chose well. Or maybe he chose well. Either way, I hope you'll both be very happy." He left after that, collecting Susanna and departing in their fancy buggy. Isabel watched them go and felt nothing but relief. That chapter was closed. This new one was just beginning. The party continued into the evening. Someone brought out whiskey, and toasts were drunk to the newlyweds' health and happiness. The fiddler was joined by a guitar player, and dancing began in earnest. Gideon, despite claiming he was terrible at dancing, swept Isabel into his arms and proved himself a liar. He moved with the same natural grace he brought to everything, guiding her through the steps with confidence. "Where did you learn to dance?" Isabel asked, breathless and laughing. "My mother taught me, said every man should know how to properly dance with his wife." His expression softened with memory. "She'd have liked you, would have said I was punching above my weight." "You mother would have been wrong. If anything, I'm the lucky one." "We're both lucky," Gideon countered, pulling her closer. "Two people who needed each other finding each other against all odds. That's not luck, Isabel. That's fate." They danced until the stars came out, until children fell asleep in their parents' laps, and older folks began making their way home. Evelyn appeared at some point with a knowing smile and a set of keys. "The house is yours tonight," she said. "I'm staying in town with the Harrisons. The Hands know to stay in the bunkhouse and not come near the main house until tomorrow afternoon at the earliest. So you two have privacy, finally." She hugged them both. "Be happy. You've earned it." The ride back to the Iron Willow was quiet, both of them too full of emotion for words. The moon was high and bright, painting the landscape in silver. Gideon's arms stayed around Isabel's waist the entire way, as if he couldn't bear not touching her. When they arrived, he helped her down from the wagon. Then, without warning, swept her up into his arms. "Tradition," he said simply, and carried her over the threshold. Inside, the house was quiet and intimate. Someone, probably Evelyn, had lit lamps in the main room and bedroom, creating pools of warm light. Fresh flowers sat on the table, and the bed had been made with clean sheets. It was simple but thoughtful, creating an atmosphere of welcome. Gideon set Isabel down carefully, but didn't let go. They stood in the lamplight, arms around each other, and for a moment just breathed together, letting the reality of what they'd done sink in. They were married. This was their home. The rest of their lives started now. "Are you nervous?" Gideon asked softly. "A little," Isabel admitted. "But not about this. About us. I'm nervous about being enough. About building a life that lives up to this beginning. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch achingly tender. "I'm terrified of letting you down. Of this life being too hard, too lonely, too different from what you deserve. But Isabel, I promise you this. I'll wake up every morning and choose you. Choose us. Choose to build something worth keeping. That's all I know how to promise." "That's all I need," she said, and kissed him. This kiss was different from the ones before. Deeper, more urgent, weighted with the knowledge that they were husband and wife now, that no propriety or social convention stood between them anymore. Gideon's hand slid into her hair, dislodging pins until it tumbled free down her back. Isabel's fingers worked at the buttons of his shirt, needing to feel his skin, needing to confirm he was real and solid and hers. They made their way to the bedroom in stops and starts, pausing to kiss, to touch, to reassure themselves this wasn't a dream. The lamp cast flickering shadows on the walls as they undressed each other with hands that trembled with emotion more than nervousness. When they finally came together, it was with a tenderness and passion that felt like a promise being fulfilled, like two pieces of a whole finally reuniting. Afterward, they lay tangled together beneath the quilts, skin to skin, hearts still racing. Gideon's fingers traced lazy patterns on Isabel's shoulder, and she felt more at peace than she ever had in her life. "I love you," he said into the darkness. "I know I said it before, but I need you to hear it again. I love you, Isabel Walsh. Every stubborn, brilliant, brave part of you." "I love you too," she replied, turning to press a kiss to his chest. "Thank you for saving me, not just from the blizzard, but from a life where I never would have known what this feels like. Being seen, being valued, being loved for exactly who I am." "You saved yourself," Gideon countered. "I just provided the horse and the coat. Everything else, surviving, adapting, thriving, that was all you. Don't ever forget that." They talked quietly into the night, making plans and sharing dreams. They'd expand the ranch gradually, Gideon said, building it into something that could support a family. Isabel wanted to start a garden, maybe raise more chickens, perhaps even learn to ride so she could help with the lighter ranch work. They discussed children, both wanting them but knowing the dangers of childbirth on the frontier, agreeing to face that future together when it came. "What do you think your family would say if they could see you now?" Gideon asked at one point. Isabel considered the question. "My father would be proud, I think. He always encouraged me to be myself, even when it made things difficult. My mother—" She paused. "My mother would be horrified at the state of my hands and my sun-damaged skin and my complete abandonment of social graces. But maybe, eventually, she'd see that I'm happy. That might be enough." "And your sister?" "Charlotte would think I've lost my mind, but she'd also be fascinated. She always said I was the brave one, even when I didn't feel brave at all. Maybe now I'd actually believe her." A comfortable silence fell, and Isabel felt herself drifting toward sleep, safe and warm and loved. Just before she dropped off completely, Gideon's voice came soft in the darkness. "I'm going to spend every day for the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me, choosing this life. I swear it, Isabel." "I know," she whispered back, "because that's who you are. But Gideon, you don't have to earn my love. You already have it, completely and forever." His arms tightened around her, and they fell asleep like that. Two people who'd found each other against impossible odds, who'd chosen each other with full knowledge of the hardships ahead, who'd built something real from the ashes of loneliness and loss. Outside, the Montana wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of spring flowers and new beginnings. The iron willow stood solid against the night, sheltering its inhabitants, a testament to what could be built through determination and love. And inside, two hearts beat in rhythm, marking the start of forever. The first year of marriage passed in a blur of seasons, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. Summer came hot and relentless, the kind of heat that made breathing feel like work and turned the prairie grass brittle as kindling. Isabel learned to rise before dawn, doing the hardest work before the sun climbed too high, then retreating to the relative cool of the house during the worst hours. She learned which crops would survive Montana's capricious weather and which were foolish dreams. Her garden flourished against all odds, providing vegetables that supplemented their stores and gave her a fierce pride in her own capabilities. Gideon watched his wife adapt to ranch life with growing admiration. She never complained, not about the heat or the cold, the endless work or the isolation. She simply rolled up her sleeves and did what needed doing, whether that was hauling water, mending fences, or sitting up all night with a sick calf. The Boston lady who'd arrived nearly frozen had been completely transformed into a rancher's wife, and the change was beautiful to witness. "You're staring again," Isabel said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. She was shelling peas, her hands moving with the practiced efficiency she'd developed over months of similar tasks. "Can't help it," Gideon replied, his own hands busy with a piece of leather he was braiding into a new bridle. "Still can't quite believe you're real sometimes. That you're mine." "Our first anniversary is next month," Isabel reminded him, a smile playing at her lips. "I think by now you can believe I'm not going anywhere." "Next month," he repeated, setting down his work. "1 year since the best day of my life." He reached over and took her hand, the one bearing his mother's ring and the wooden band he'd carved. "What do you want? For our anniversary?" Isabel considered the question seriously. What did she want? A year ago, she might have said financial security, or perhaps new clothes, or any number of material things. But now, sitting on this porch with calloused hands and sun-browned skin, she realized she already had everything that mattered. "Another year just like this one," she said finally, "and then another after that. Just us, building this life together." Gideon's smile was soft and warm. "That I can promise you. Though I was thinking maybe something a bit more tangible, too. There's a horse trader coming through Wolf Creek next week. Beautiful mare, good temperament. I thought maybe it was time you had your own mount, something gentler than Midnight for you to learn on properly." Isabel's eyes lit up. She'd been taking riding lessons from Gideon for months now, but always on borrowed horses or on Midnight when the big stallion was feeling cooperative. Her own horse would mean independence, the ability to ride into town herself, or check the near pastures without waiting for Gideon or one of the hands. "Really? You mean it? Really? You've earned it 10 times over, Isabel. You work as hard as any hand we've ever hired. Harder even, because you do it all without pay and without complaint." He squeezed her hand. "You deserve your own horse, your own way of moving through this land we're building together." Before Isabel could respond, they heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching fast. Both of them stood, immediately alert. Visitors at this hour usually meant trouble, but as the rider came into view, Isabel recognized young Tommy Harrison, the 15-year-old son of their nearest neighbors. "Mr. Walsh! Mrs. Walsh!" Tommy's face was flushed, his breathing labored. "My pa sent me. Ma's having the baby, but something's wrong. She's asking for Mrs. Walsh. Says she needs a woman with her, and you're the closest." Isabel was already moving, her mind racing through everything she'd read about childbirth in the medical texts she'd studied. How long has she been in labor? Since this morning. It's been hours and hours, and she's so tired, and Pa's scared even though he won't say so, and... Tommy's voice broke. "I'll get my things," Isabel said, squeezing the boy's shoulder reassuringly before hurrying inside. Her hands shook as she gathered supplies, clean cloths, her medical book, herbs Evelyn had taught her to use for pain and bleeding. She'd never attended a birth before, had only theoretical knowledge. But Margaret Harrison needed her, and there was no time to doubt herself. Gideon was saddling Midnight when she emerged. "I'm coming with you," he said, his tone brooking no argument. "I'll ride back if we need the doctor from town, but I'm not letting you go alone." They rode hard through the gathering dusk, Tommy leading the way. The Harrison Ranch was an hour's ride, and Isabel spent the entire journey praying silently that they'd arrive in time, that she'd know what to do, that both mother and baby would survive this night. Childbirth on the frontier killed so many women. She'd heard the stories, seen the graves. The thought of losing Margaret, who'd been so kind to her, who'd gifted them that beautiful quilt, it was unbearable. The Harrison house was blazing with lamplight when they arrived. John Harrison met them at the door, his face haggard with fear and exhaustion. "Thank God you're here," he said to Isabel. "She's upstairs. It's been so long, and nothing's happening, and I don't know what to do. The doctor's 3 hours away, and I'm afraid if we wait—" His voice broke. "I'll do everything I can," Isabel promised, hoping she sounded more confident than she felt. She looked at Gideon. "Stay with John, keep him calm. I'll call down if I need anything." The scene upstairs was worse than she'd feared. Margaret Harrison lay in the bed, her face pale and drawn, her nightgown soaked with sweat. Two neighbor women were with her, Mrs. Cooper and old Mrs. Dunn, who'd birthed 7 children of her own and helped deliver dozens more. They both looked relieved when Isabel appeared. "Baby's breech," Mrs. Dunn said bluntly. "Been trying to turn it for the past hour, but no luck. She's wearing out, and if we can't get this baby turned and delivered soon, we'll lose them both." Isabel's medical knowledge clicked into place. Breech births were dangerous, but not impossible. The key was patience, proper positioning, and sometimes manual intervention. She washed her hands thoroughly, said another silent prayer, and moved to Margaret's side. "I'm here," she said softly, taking the laboring woman's hand. "We're going to get through this together. Do you trust me?" Margaret's eyes, glazed with pain and exhaustion, focused on Isabel's face. "Yes," she whispered, "I trust you." What followed were the longest hours of Isabel's life. She worked with Mrs. Dunn, using techniques she'd only read about, trying to manipulate the baby into the correct position. Margaret screamed with pain, and downstairs, Isabel could hear John pacing, could imagine Gideon holding him back from charging upstairs. Mrs. Cooper kept cool cloths on Margaret's forehead and encouraged her to breathe, to push when told, to rest when she could. "I can't," Margaret sobbed at one point. "I can't do this anymore. I'm so tired." "Yes, you can," Isabel said firmly, channeling every ounce of strength she possessed into her voice. "You're one of the strongest women I know, Margaret Harrison. You're going to meet your baby tonight. You're going to hold your child and name them and love them. But right now you need to fight. Can you do that? Can you fight a little longer?" Something in Isabel's words seemed to reach Margaret. She nodded, gathering what was left of her strength. And then, miraculously, Isabel felt the baby shift. Just slightly, but enough. "It's turning," she breathed. "Mrs. Dunn, it's turning." The next contraction came, and this time when Margaret pushed, there was progress. Slow, agonizing progress, but progress nonetheless. Isabel coached her through each push, monitoring both mother and baby as best she could with limited tools and knowledge. It felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes before she finally saw the baby's head crown. "One more push," she urged. "Give me everything you have left, Margaret. One more." Margaret's scream seemed to shake the rafters, and then suddenly there was a baby, slippery and perfect, in Isabel's hands. A girl, tiny, but squalling with impressive lung power. Isabel cleared the infant's airway, tied and cut the cord with shaking hands, and wrapped the baby in clean cloths before placing her on Margaret's chest. "You did it," Isabel said, and realized she was crying. "You have a daughter." Margaret's exhausted face transformed with joy as she looked down at her baby. Downstairs, they could hear John's whoop of relief at the sound of crying. Mrs. Dunn was already cleaning up, her movements efficient despite her own tears. Mrs. Cooper had collapsed into a chair, fanning herself. "You did good, Mrs. Walsh," Mrs. Dunn said quietly. "Real good. That was as difficult a birth as I've seen, and you kept your head. Saved them both, I reckon." Isabel looked down at her hands, still shaking, stained with blood, and felt the weight of what had just happened. She'd helped bring a life into the world. She, Isabel Turner Walsh from Boston, who'd arrived in Montana knowing nothing about frontier life, had just assisted in delivering a baby under circumstances that would have paralyzed her a year ago. John was allowed up finally, and the sight of the big, tough rancher crying over his wife and daughter made everyone tear up again. He gripped Isabel's hand so hard it hurt. "Thank you," he said hoarsely. "Thank you for saving them. I'll never forget this. Never." It was nearly dawn when Isabel and Gideon finally headed home. The baby, they decided to name her Isabel Margaret, which had made Isabel cry all over again, was nursing contentedly, and Margaret was sleeping with John watching over them both. Isabel was exhausted beyond measure, but also filled with something that felt like purpose crystallized. "You were incredible," Gideon said as they rode slowly through the morning mist. "I've never been more proud of anyone in my life." "I was terrified," Isabel admitted. "Every moment I was sure I'd do something wrong, that I'd fail them. But you didn't. You pushed through the fear and did what needed doing. That's courage, Isabel. Real courage." He reached over and squeezed her hand. and you probably just became the most important woman in this territory. Word will spread. Every expectant mother within 50 miles is going to want you at her birth. He was right, though Isabel couldn't have guessed the extent of it that morning. By the end of summer, she'd assisted at 3 more births, each one successful. Women began seeking her out for medical advice, for help with sick children, for the practical knowledge she'd accumulated through reading and experience. Without meaning to, Isabel had become something her Boston upbringing had never prepared her for. Essential. Fall brought its own changes. A letter arrived from Boston, forwarded through several addresses before finding its way to the Iron Willow. Isabel recognized her father's handwriting and opened it with trembling hands. "My dearest Isabel," it began, "your letter reached me some months ago, and I apologize for the delay in responding. Your mother needed time to adjust to the news of your marriage, and I thought it best to wait until I could write with news that might please you. Charlotte was married last month to her accountant, as planned. The wedding was lovely, but I confess I thought of you throughout and wondered what your frontier wedding was like. I hope it was everything you wanted. Your mother asks me to tell you that she is reconciled to your choice, though she wishes you had chosen differently. But Isabel, I want you to know that I am proud of you. Proud of your courage in going west. Proud of your resilience in surviving hardship. Proud of your choice to build a life on your own terms. Your last letter, describing your work with expectant mothers and your growing role in your community, only reinforced my certainty that you found where you truly belong. Enclosed, you will find a bank draft. It is your inheritance from your grandmother, which came due last month. Your mother wanted to withhold it, thinking you might use it to return home, but I convinced her that you've earned the right to use it as you see fit. Build your ranch, help your husband, invest in your future. You have my blessing and my love, always. Your devoted father." The bank draft was substantial, enough to buy a significant amount of cattle, or build a new barn, or provide a financial cushion against future hardships. Isabel stared at it for a long moment, then showed it to Gideon that evening. "This changes things," he said quietly. "With this, we could expand faster, buy better breeding stock, maybe even purchase that adjacent property I've had my eye on." He looked at her carefully. "But it's your money, Isabel, your inheritance. You should decide how to use it." "It's our money," Isabel corrected. "We're partners, remember? Everything I have is yours, and everything you have is mine. That's what marriage means." She studied the draft, thinking, "What if we use some of it to build a small clinic? Nothing fancy, just a room with proper supplies and equipment. Somewhere women could come for checkups. Somewhere I could treat minor injuries and illnesses. The rest we could invest in the ranch, like you said. Build our future while also helping the community." Gideon's expression was wondering. "You want to build a clinic? Become a frontier doctor?" "Not a doctor. I don't have the training. But a midwife, maybe. A healer. Someone people can turn to when they're hurt or sick or scared." Isabel met his eyes. "I found my purpose out here, Gideon. It's not just being your wife, though I love that. It's being useful. Being someone who helps, who makes a difference. Is that foolish?" "It's extraordinary," he said, using that word again, the one that never failed to make her heart skip. "You're extraordinary. And yes, let's build your clinic. Let's build all of it, the future we want, together." The construction began in October, a small building near the main house that would serve as Isabel's medical space. The community pitched in, neighbors donating materials and labor, everyone invested in having a local healer. By the time winter arrived again, Isabel's second Montana winter, so different from her first, the clinic was finished, stocked with supplies ordered from back east, and medicines Isabel had learned to make from local plants. Christmas that year was celebrated at the Iron Willow, with half the territory invited. The house was packed with people, children running underfoot, the smell of roasted turkey and fresh bread filling the air. Isabel moved through the crowd, accepting compliments on the clinic, checking on pregnant women, discussing treatment plans for various ailments. She was wearing a new dress, not fancy by Boston standards, but beautiful in its frontier simplicity, and her mother's gold ring glinted on her finger alongside Gideon's wooden one. "You look happy," Evelyn observed, appearing at her elbow with 2 cups of cider. "Really, truly happy." "I am," Isabel said simply. I know it hasn't even been 2 years since I arrived here half frozen and desperate, but Evelyn, I can barely remember the woman I was before. She feels like a stranger. She was a stranger. This is who you really are. Isabel Walsh, frontier healer, rancher's wife, bravest woman in Montana. Evelyn clinked their cups together. Here's to finding where you belong. Later that night, after all the guests had departed and the house was quiet again, Isabel and Gideon sat by the fire in comfortable silence. She was knitting a baby blanket for another expectant mother while he worked on a new carving. Over the past months, his wooden horses had become sought after, with people commissioning them as gifts and keepsakes. Between the ranch, Isabel's healing work, and Gideon's carving, they were building something sustainable, something that would last. I've been thinking, Gideon said, breaking the silence. About children? About us having children. He set down his knife carefully. I know we said we'd wait, let you get established with your medical work. But Isabel, I look at you with those babies you deliver, and I see how natural it is for you, how much love you have to give, and I think I'm ready, if you are. Isabel's hands stilled on the knitting needles. They'd talked about children abstractly, the way people do when discussing a distant future. But Gideon was making it real, immediate. The thought filled her with equal parts excitement and terror. I'm scared, she admitted. I've seen how dangerous childbirth is out here, how many things can go wrong, and I know that having medical knowledge doesn't protect me from those risks. If anything, it makes me more aware of them. I'm scared too, Gideon said honestly. Scared of losing you, scared of being a father, scared I won't know what to do. But Isabel, I'm also tired of letting fear make our decisions. We've built something beautiful here, you and me. I want to share it with children. Want to teach them about this land. Watch you teach them to be brave and honest and kind. Want to see what we can create together. Isabel thought about Margaret Harrison's daughter, little Isabel Margaret, growing strong and healthy. She thought about all the babies she'd helped deliver, the joy in parents' faces when they held their children for the first time. She thought about the legacy they were building, not just land and buildings, but something more profound, a way of life, a community, a future. Yes, she said softly. Yes, I'm ready. I'm ready to try. Gideon's smile was brilliant. He set aside his carving and pulled her close, kissing her with a tenderness that had only deepened over their time together. We'll face it together, he promised. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. Spring arrived with its usual chaos of roundup and planting, and by the time the wildflowers bloomed across the prairie, Isabel knew she was pregnant. The knowledge filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She threw herself into preparations, making plans with Evelyn about what would be needed, reading and rereading every medical text she owned about pregnancy and delivery. You're going to worry yourself sick, Evelyn said one afternoon, watching Isabel frantically take notes. You've delivered a dozen babies. You know what to expect. Knowing what to expect doesn't mean I'm not scared, Isabel confessed. What if something goes wrong? What if I can't do it? Then you'll do what you always do. You'll fight through it, and you won't be alone. I'll be here, and Mrs. Dunn, and every woman in this territory who you've helped. We take care of our own, Boston. You're going to be fine. The pregnancy progressed through summer and into fall. Isabel continued her medical work as long as she was able, though Gideon became increasingly protective as her belly swelled. The community rallied around them, bringing gifts and advice, sharing stories of their own children. The ranch hands built a beautiful cradle, each one contributing something, a carved detail, a coat of polish, a soft blanket. You've done a lot of good here, Red said one evening, presenting the finished cradle. Helped a lot of people. We wanted to do something for you and the boss. For the little one. Isabel's eyes filled with tears. Pregnancy had made her emotional in ways she never expected. Thank you, all of you. This baby is going to be so loved. December arrived with the first heavy snows, and Isabel felt the baby drop, a sign that birth was approaching. She tried to stay calm, tried to remember everything she knew about childbirth. But when the first contractions came, strong and regular, in the middle of a blizzard that made fetching help impossible, fear threatened to overwhelm her. I can't do this, she gasped, gripping Gideon's hand as another contraction tore through her. Not now, not like this. We need Mrs. Dunn. We need... You can do this, Gideon said firmly, his face pale but determined. You're the bravest person I know, Isabel Walsh. You've survived blizzards and delivered babies and built a clinic from nothing. You can do this. But what if? No what ifs. Just us, right now, bringing our child into the world. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. We're going to do this together. Evelyn was there too, of course, having refused to leave despite the storm. Between the two of them, they coached Isabel through each contraction, offering encouragement and physical support. Hours passed in a blur of pain and effort, and Isabel thought about Margaret Harrison, about every woman she'd ever helped, about the strength she'd witnessed again and again. If they could do it, so could she. The baby arrived as dawn broke, a son with Gideon's storm-gray eyes and a cry that announced his presence to the world. Isabel held him, exhausted and overwhelmed and more in love than she'd thought possible. Gideon knelt beside the bed, tears streaming down his face, his finger clutched in the baby's tiny fist. Daniel, Isabel said softly, remembering they'd chosen the name months ago. Daniel Walsh. Welcome to the world, little one. He's perfect, Gideon breathed. You're perfect. I can't believe you did that. You're incredible. The blizzard raged for 3 days, trapping them in the house, but Isabel didn't mind. She spent the time recovering, learning to nurse, marveling at the tiny human they'd created. Gideon was endlessly patient, changing diapers and bringing her water, sitting up during long nights when the baby wouldn't sleep, his voice soft as he talked to his son about the ranch and the land and the life they'd build together. When the storm finally cleared, visitors began arriving. Everyone wanted to see the baby, to bring gifts, to celebrate this new life. Margaret Harrison came with little Isabel Margaret, now a healthy toddler, and the two women embraced, both crying, bound by the shared experience of birth and survival. You told me I could do it, Margaret said. When I wanted to give up, you told me to fight. I'm telling you the same thing now. Being a mother is hard, but you're strong enough. You're more than strong enough. The years that followed brought more changes. 2 more children, another son they named William after Gideon's lost brother, and a daughter they called Clara. The ranch expanded, the cattle herd grew, and the Iron Willow became known throughout the territory as a place of hospitality and healing. Isabel's clinic served dozens of families, saving lives and earning her a reputation as the best healer in 3 counties. But the true measure of their success wasn't in land or cattle or reputation. It was in the quiet moments. Gideon teaching Daniel to ride, young William's laughter as he chased chickens, baby Clara sleeping peacefully in the cradle the ranch hands had made. It was in the way the community came together, helping each other through winters and droughts, celebrating births and mourning losses as one extended family. On their 5th anniversary, Isabel and Gideon stood on the porch at sunset, watching their children play in the yard. The ranch house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family, and the clinic had doubled in size. The Iron Willow was thriving, a testament to what could be built through hard work, love, and partnership. Do you ever regret it? Gideon asked, his arm around her waist. Choosing this life? Staying here instead of returning to Boston? Isabel thought about the question seriously. She thought about the woman she'd been, cold and desperate on that train platform, certain she was going to die. She thought about all the hardships she'd endured, the fears she'd overcome, the person she'd become. And she thought about this man beside her, who'd saved her life and then spent years helping her build a life worth saving. Regret? She turned to face him, cupping his weathered face in her work-roughened hands. Gideon, that night on the platform, I thought my life was ending. But it was just beginning. You gave me shelter and warmth, yes, but more than that, you gave me purpose. You saw me, really saw me, and loved what you saw. You made me your partner, your equal. How could I ever regret that? Even when the winters are brutal? When the work never stops? When things are hard? Especially then, because we face it together. Because every challenge we overcome makes us stronger. Because this life we've built, it's real, Gideon. It matters. I matter in a way I never did in Boston. She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. You asked me once if I missed Boston. I don't. Not even a little. Because this right here, this is home. You are home." Gideon kissed her then, soft and lingering, 5 years of love and partnership in that single gesture. When they broke apart, Daniel was calling for his father, wanting to show off something he'd found, while William chased Clara around the yard and Evelyn watched from the doorway with fond exasperation. "Come on," Isabel said, taking Gideon's hand. "Our children need us." "Our children," he repeated, wonder still evident in his voice even after 5 years of fatherhood. "Our home, our life." They walked together toward their family, two people who'd found each other in a blizzard and built something beautiful from the cold. The Montana sky stretched endlessly above them, vast and blue and full of possibility. The iron willow stood solid behind them, shelter and sanctuary, a ranch built on love and determination. And Isabel Turner Walsh, once a mail-order bride abandoned in the snow, now stood wrapped not just in a cowboy's coat, but in the life they'd created together, a life of purpose and partnership, of love that had grown deeper with each passing season. She'd been saved by a stranger's kindness and stayed for the life they built together. She'd found her forever in the last place she expected, with a man who saw her strength when she felt weakest, who believed in her when she doubted herself, who loved her not despite her past but because of who she'd become. The wind carried the sound of children's laughter and the scent of pine and wildflowers. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed and horses whinnied. The sun painted the sky in shades of gold and amber, another day ending, another beginning on the horizon. This was happiness, Isabel thought. Not the absence of hardship, but the presence of love and purpose and belonging. This was home, built from nothing by two people who refused to give up on each other or themselves. This was the life she'd been searching for when she answered that advertisement so long ago. Not the life she'd imagined, but the one she needed all along. And as Gideon's hand tightened around hers, and their children's voices filled the evening air, Isabel knew with absolute certainty that every frozen moment on that platform, every hardship endured, every fear overcome, had been worth it. Because they'd led her here, to this man, to this life, to this perfect, imperfect, beautiful forever. The story that had begun with abandonment and near death had transformed into something extraordinary. Not because it was easy, but because they'd chosen each other every day, through every challenge, building something that would last not just their lifetimes, but generations beyond. This was their legacy, the Iron Willow Ranch, yes, but more importantly, the proof that courage and love could transform any circumstance, that second chances existed for those brave enough to seize them, that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us exactly where we need to be. As darkness fell and stars began to emerge in the vast Montana sky, Isabel and Gideon gathered their children inside, where warmth and light waited. The door closed behind them, shutting out the cold, and through the windows the glow of lamplight spilled across the snow like a promise. The ranch settled into peaceful silence, home to a family built from hope and hardship, from a cowboy's kindness and a bride's courage, from love that had started with a coat wrapped around shivering shoulders and grown into something that would last forever.